An abandoned woman marries a humble fisherman, but years later she discovers he is actually a prince. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. Lucia Bianchi had learned in the span of 3 weeks that a door could be closed with a smile. It was always the smile first. A hand pressed to the chest, a sigh that pretended to be sorrow. Then the words came, sweet as sugared water and just as empty. "I should like to help," the baker's wife said, not looking at Lucia's eyes. "Truly, but you understand. People talk. My husband says we must be prudent." Lucia stood at the edge of the counter, fingers curled around the strap of her worn basket. "I asked for work, not charity." The woman's smile tightened. "Yes, work. That is what I mean. But the shop is small. We cannot have confusion." "Confusion?" Lucia repeated. The woman glanced toward the other customers, as if Lucia were a pot left too close to the flame. "You know what I mean. It would not be wise." Lucia nodded once. She forced her fingers to loosen. "Then I will not trouble you further." She walked out, with the same measured steps she had used when she still belonged to the town's good opinion. Outside, the morning market pressed in with noise and salt air, baskets of anchovies and lemons, mothers calling children back by the collar. Lucia moved through it like someone who had become transparent. At the fish stall, an old man weighed a bundle and refused to meet her gaze. At the seamstress's window, the shutters were half closed, even though the sun was bright. At the fountain, 2 girls leaned toward each other and stopped speaking when Lucia passed. She heard her name anyway. Bianchi. Poor man. Her father. "Did you hear the Count is back in town?" "Hush, she will hear you." As if that would be the worst of it. As if the worst hadn't already happened. Lucia stopped at the fountain, cupped water in her hands and let it spill again. Her palms were clean. She scrubbed them anyway, because it gave her something to do other than shake. A voice behind her, soft and false. "Lucia." She did not turn at once. She had learned how quickly her face betrayed her. She drew a breath, set her jaw, and turned slowly. Signora Dalla Torre, widow, lace collar, fingers heavy with rings. She looked Lucia over with the careful pity of a woman who was relieved the scandal belonged to someone else. "My dear," the widow said, "you look unwell." "I am hungry," Lucia replied. The widow blinked, offended by plain truth. "Of course. That is why I wish to speak to you. I have a suggestion." Lucia waited. "There is the convent," the widow continued. "A quiet place. The sisters take in women who need shelter." Lucia's mouth tightened. "They take in women who have been discarded." The widow's cheeks reddened. "Lucia, I'm trying to help." "You are trying to hide me," Lucia said. A few heads turned. The widow lowered her voice. "Please, do not make a scene. You must think of your future." "My future," Lucia echoed, and something sharp rose in her chest. "You mean the future you have decided I deserve?" The widow leaned closer. "You should be grateful anyone offers you counsel." Lucia looked at the widow's rings, at the smooth certainty in her posture. Then she looked into her eyes. "If you wish to help, tell the town the truth. Tell them I did not commit a crime by believing a man's promises." The widow's lips pressed together. "Promises are not proof." Lucia's throat tightened. "Nor is gossip." The widow's gaze slid away. "There are things a young lady must protect," Lucia said quietly. "My protection was supposed to come from honor." The widow drew back as if Lucia had pushed her. "You are bitter." "I am awake," Lucia replied. She turned away before the widow could find another polished cruelty to set in her path. She walked quickly, because if she walked slowly she might stop, and if she stopped she might crumple, and she refused to give them that spectacle. At the edge of the market square stood the Alessi carriage, black and clean and unquestioned, the horses glossy. It had not been there yesterday. Lucia's heart gave a painful leap. She hated herself for it. Hope, even after everything, still rose like a foolish tide. She approached the carriage as if she belonged near it. 2 footmen stood stiff as stone. One of them lifted a hand. "Signorina." "Move," Lucia said, and her voice was steadier than she expected. The footman frowned, but he had heard her name. He had heard all the whispers. He stepped slightly into her path. "You cannot." "I can," she said. "I will." The carriage door opened from within. A man stepped out. Count Vittorio Alessi did not look like a villain. That was part of the problem. He looked exactly like what the town wanted to worship. Fine coat, smooth hair, hands that never knew fish scales or rough rope. He smiled when he saw Lucia, as if they were old friends meeting by chance. "Lucia," he said warmly, "you have been unwell." The familiar ease of his voice made her stomach twist. It was the same ease that had once whispered assurances beside a garden wall. The same ease that had said, "You will be my wife, I swear it," when the night was quiet and the world seemed kind. "You left," she said. His smile did not falter. "I traveled. As you know, my family's affairs." "You left," she repeated louder. Several people paused in the market. Not many, but enough. Lucia felt their attention latch onto her like hooks. Vittorio's eyes flicked to the onlookers. His voice lowered. "This is not the place." "It is the place," Lucia said, "because you made my life a public tale, and you walked away as if it were nothing." He sighed as if she were a child insisting on a toy. "Lucia, you are overwrought." Overwrought. The word landed like a slap, neat and bloodless. It meant she was unreasonable. It meant she was at fault for feeling anything at all. She swallowed. "You gave me your word." Vittorio's gaze softened, practiced. "I was fond of you." "Fond," she repeated, tasting bitterness. "Did your fondness write letters? Did it send my father away from his own table because men would not shake his hand?" Vittorio's expression grew more solemn. "You must not blame me for the world's misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings," Lucia said, and a laugh almost broke out of her, sharp and ugly. She forced it down. "Then, correct them." He looked at her as if she had asked him to set fire to his own house. "You know I cannot. To speak is to give the gossip more life. The wisest course is silence." "My silence is what you wanted," Lucia said, "so you could pretend you never spoke to me." His eyes narrowed slightly. Not anger, something colder. Calculation. "Lucia," he said, "I have come to offer you a solution." She stared at him. "A solution?" "Yes, a discreet arrangement. It would spare your father further discomfort." "My father is already dead," Lucia said. The words felt unreal in her mouth, even now. He had died 2 months ago, and Lucia had still woken some mornings expecting to hear his cough in the next room. Vittorio's mouth tightened. "I am sorry to hear that." "You heard it," Lucia said. "The whole town heard it, and still they did not come to the funeral." Vittorio lifted a hand as if to hush her. "Please, we are observed." Lucia stepped closer. She could smell the faint perfume on his collar. It made her want to gag. "You said you would marry me," she said very clearly. "Say now in this square that you lied." His eyes flashed with irritation. "Do not be dramatic." "Say it," Lucia insisted. "Say you used me." "Lucia," he said, voice still smooth. "You will regret this." "Regret." Her hands trembled, but she kept them at her sides. "I have already lost everything. What more do you think you can take?" He leaned in, only enough that she could hear him without the town hearing. His tone changed. Less warm, more precise. "I can take your last chance at decency," he murmured, "if you continue." Lucia stared at him. Her breath caught. The threat was not loud. It did not need to be. He held the town's opinion like a leash. She whispered, "You have already taken it." His smile returned, as if nothing had happened. He straightened and looked to the onlookers with practiced concern. "Signorina Bianchi is distressed. I hope she finds peace." Lucia's vision blurred for a moment. She wanted to shout. She wanted to seize his sleeve and drag him into truth. But she felt the eyes around her, waiting to see if she would become the spectacle they expected. She stepped back. Vittorio's footman opened the carriage door. The Count did not look at her again. As the carriage rolled away, Lucia stood in the square with her basket hanging empty at her side. The market sounds resumed as if nothing had happened. People returned to their fish and their bargaining. They had watched a fallen woman plead, and they had seen a nobleman remain calm. That was all they needed to decide who was right. A voice behind Lucia said, "He is careful with words." Lucia turned. A man stood a few paces away, holding a coil of rope over one shoulder. His clothes were plain, worn by salt and sun. His face was calm, almost blank, but his eyes were steady on Lucia. Marco Conti. Lucia had seen him often enough by the boats, always quiet, always apart. The village said he had come years ago and stayed because the sea suited him and because he spoke little. He was known for paying his debts and refusing to drink too much. It was the highest praise most men here ever earned. Lucia answered stiffly, "So it seems." Marco's gaze went briefly toward the road where the carriage had vanished. "He does not like to be cornered." Lucia's throat tightened. "Neither do I." Marco nodded once, as if that settled something. "You asked for work." Lucia blinked. "What?" "I heard you," Marco said. "At the baker, and yesterday at the olive merchant. You ask plainly." Her cheeks warmed with shame. "Do you follow me?" He did not look offended. "The town follows you? I simply notice." Lucia lifted her chin. "Then you have noticed they will not hire me?" "Yes," Marco said. She waited, unsure why he still stood there. He adjusted the rope on his shoulder. "I have a house. It is small. I have a boat. It is steady. I need a wife." Lucia stared at him. Somewhere in the square someone laughed. Lucia did not know if it was at her or at something else. It did not matter. Everything felt like it belonged to her disgrace now. "You need a wife," she repeated slowly. Marco's face remained composed. "Yes. You have chosen a strange moment to declare it." "I did not declare," he said. "I offered." Lucia's mind scrambled. "We have barely spoken." "We do not have to speak much," Marco replied. That should have offended her. Instead, it disarmed her. The men who had once courted her had always spoken too much. They had poured words into her like wine and expected her to drink until she was dizzy enough to agree to anything. Marco's words were few, but they did not slide around the truth. Lucia said carefully, "Why me?" Marco looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Because you are hungry." Lucia's chest tightened. "That is pity." "No," Marco answered. "Pity is soft. This is practical." Practical. The word was almost brutal, and yet it did not humiliate her. It did not make her small. It made her feel, for the first time in weeks, like someone was speaking to her, as if she had sense. She said, "A man like you could find a girl without a story." Marco's mouth tightened slightly. "A girl without a story will not come to my house." "Why not?" He hesitated, and for a heartbeat something flickered in his eyes. Not shame. Something like refusal. "My life is not a courtship," he said. "It is work," Lucia swallowed. "And you think I can endure it?" "I think you already have," Marco replied. Lucia's breath caught. She wanted to scoff. She wanted to tell him he knew nothing of her. But the words lodged in her throat because she realized he had been watching, yes, but not with the town's hunger for scandal. With a steadier gaze, she forced herself to speak. "If I become your wife, I will not be your servant." Marco nodded. "Good. And I will not be hidden," she added sharper. "I will not become a secret in your house so you can keep a clean name outside it." Marco's eyes held hers. "My name does not need cleaning." Lucia felt a strange sting behind her eyes. She blinked hard. "People will mock you." "They already do," Marco said. That startled her. "Why?" He shrugged once. "Because I do not join their talk. Because I do not kneel for anyone. Because I keep to myself." Lucia breathed out slowly. "They will say you married me for pity or for something worse." Marco's jaw tightened. "They will say what they want. They always do." Lucia looked away because if she kept staring at him, she might believe this was real. And believing had cost her dearly. She asked in a small voice she hated, "What would you expect of me?" Marco answered immediately. "To keep the house. To mend what needs mending. To sell fish when I am at sea. To speak to me plainly. That is all? For now," he said. Lucia's lips parted. "For now," she repeated. Marco's gaze did not waver. "A marriage can be many things. I offer you shelter and a name. In return, I ask for honesty and effort. I will not demand softness you cannot give." Lucia's throat tightened painfully. She turned back to him. "And if I refuse?" Marco shifted the rope again. "Then you will find another way." There was no threat in it, no insistence. It made her realize he was not bargaining. He was offering a door she could step through or not. Lucia stood very still, feeling the market's air on her face, feeling the weight of every hungry night ahead if she did not. Her voice came out rough. When? Marco's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he had not allowed himself to assume she would say yes. The priest is free tomorrow afternoon. Lucia laughed, a small broken sound. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, Marco confirmed. Lucia's fingers tightened around her basket strap until it hurt. I have no dowry. I did not ask for one, Marco said. I have no fine clothes. You can wear what you have, he replied, and my reputation... Marco cut in, quiet but firm. I did not ask for that either. Lucia's throat burned. She looked toward the road again, where the Count's carriage had disappeared. She saw, in her mind, her father's empty chair and the landlord's careful face when he asked if she had somewhere else to go. She whispered, If I do this, I will not beg for kindness again. Marco's gaze softened, just slightly. Then do not beg. Decide. Decide. Lucia swallowed and straightened. Very well. Marco held her eyes. Very well, he repeated, as if he needed to taste the words to believe them. Lucia's voice steadied. Tell the priest. I will come. Marco nodded once. I will. He turned to go, then paused. Lucia, she flinched at her name in his mouth. Yes? Eat, Marco said simply. He reached into his pouch and held out a small coin. Lucia stared at it. Her pride surged up, hot and wounded. I am not your beggar, she snapped. Marco did not withdraw the coin. You are my wife tomorrow, take it today. Lucia's breath hitched. The words were absurd, and yet they wrapped around her like a coat she had forgotten she needed. She took the coin with stiff fingers. I will repay you. Marco's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You will. Then he walked away, and Lucia stood in the square, holding a coin and a future she had not imagined when she woke. That night, Lucia returned to the small room she rented from a woman who pretended not to know her. The landlady did not greet her. She set a bowl of thin soup on the table without a word. Lucia ate, and the soup tasted like anger and relief. In the morning, she washed her only decent dress and hung it where it might dry. She braided her hair with careful hands. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror and saw the same face that had once been admired at festivals. Nothing about her features had changed, only the world's permission. When the bell rang for afternoon prayers, Lucia walked to the church alone. She felt every step as if she were walking through a corridor of eyes. At the church door, two women murmured to each other. Lucia caught only fragments. Desperation. Marco is strange. Perhaps he is kind. Or perhaps he is foolish, Lucia heard beneath it. Lucia lifted her chin and entered. The church was small. The priest, Father Renzo, stood with a book in hand, his expression solemn. Marco was already there, near the front, hands clasped behind his back as if he were waiting for a verdict. When Lucia approached, Father Renzo looked at her with something that was not pity, it was steadiness. Signorina Bianchi, he said quietly. Lucia's throat tightened. Father. Marco turned at the sound of her step. His eyes took her in, not hungrily, not judging, simply noting. It was unsettling in its calm. Father Renzo cleared his throat. Signor Conti, Lucia, we are gathered for holy matrimony. A soft sound rose from the pews. Lucia had not realized how many had come, not to support her, to witness, to confirm the shape of her fall. Father Renzo looked at them sharply, and the murmur died. He turned back to Lucia and Marco. You both enter this union freely? Marco answered at once. Yes, Father. Lucia forced her voice not to tremble. Yes. Father Renzo began the rites. Lucia heard the words as if from a distance. Honor, fidelity, household, God. When the moment came to speak vows, Marco's voice carried in the stillness. I, Marco Conti, take you, Lucia Bianchi, to be my lawful wife, he said, to provide for you and keep you, to honor you as my own. Lucia swallowed. Her tongue felt too big for her mouth. She lifted her eyes to his. He was watching her, as if her words mattered, as if they were not a formality. She spoke, clear and low. I, Lucia Bianchi, take you, Marco Conti, to be my lawful husband, to keep your house with care, to stand with you in hardship and in peace." Father Renzo placed their hands together. Marco's palm was rough, warm. Lucia's fingers trembled against it. "Do you accept this woman?" Father Renzo said. "And will you keep her with honor?" "I do," Marco said. "And you," Father Renzo asked Lucia, "do you accept this man? And will you keep him with honor?" Lucia drew a breath. She felt the eyes behind her. She felt the weight of her own fear. She thought of the Count's smooth voice. "I can take your last chance at decency." She refused in that moment to let him define what decency was. "I do," she said. Father Renzo blessed them. He pronounced them husband and wife. A few polite claps sounded, brief and restrained. The rest was silence. Lucia felt as if she had stepped onto a bridge that might sway beneath her at any moment. As they turned to leave, a voice from the back of the church said, loud enough to be heard, "A fisherman's wife suits her." Lucia's face went hot. Marco stopped. He turned slowly. His expression was calm, but the calm had a sharp edge now. He looked toward the pews. "Who said that?" The silence thickened. A young man, red-faced, shifted and tried to laugh it away. "It was only—" Marco walked 2 steps closer. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply spoke as if he were stating a fact that could not be argued. "My wife will be addressed with respect," he said. "If you cannot manage that, keep your tongue behind your teeth." The young man sputtered. "I meant no insult." "It was an insult," Marco replied. Father Renzo cleared his throat, a warning. "That is enough." Marco held the young man's gaze a moment longer, then turned back to Lucia. Lucia's breath was shaky. She did not know whether to be mortified or grateful. She walked beside Marco out of the church, hearing new whispers ripple behind them. Outside, the sea wind cut through the afternoon. The light was sharp. Lucia's hands were cold. Marco extended his arm, not as a lover would, but as a husband in public, offering form. Lucia hesitated. Marco said quietly, "Take it." She slid her hand into the crook of his arm. His sleeve was rough against her fingers. It steadied her more than she expected. They walked down the path toward the fishermen's cottages, away from the town centre where Lucia's shame had been born and bred. Along the way, the landlady who rented Lucia's room stood in her doorway. She watched them with narrowed eyes. Lucia slowed, realizing she had not gathered her few belongings. The landlady called, "Signora Conti." Lucia's stomach turned at the new name. It did not feel like hers yet. The landlady's tone was clipped. "Your things are by the door. I will not have any confusion in my house." Lucia nodded once, refusing to argue. She stepped inside and saw her bundle on the floor, 2 dresses, a ribbon, her mother's small rosary, a thin blanket. That was all that remained of her former life. The landlady hovered like a guard. "You are fortunate," she said, voice low. "Not many men would overlook." Lucia lifted her bundle. "He did not overlook anything," she said softly. He looked straight at it. The landlady's mouth tightened. "Do not be proud." Lucia met her gaze. "I have nothing else." She walked out. As they continued, Marco said, "Do you want to rest before you see the house?" "I want to see it now," Lucia replied. She did not know why the urgency sat in her, perhaps because if she paused she might change her mind, or perhaps because she feared the house would be a disappointment that would confirm everyone's sneers. Marco nodded. "As you wish." The cottage was close to the shore, not far from the boats. It was small, as Marco had said. Clean, simple. A table, 2 chairs, a hearth, a narrow bed in an alcove, a shelf with a few books that surprised Lucia more than anything else in the room. She stared at the books. Marco noticed. "They were here before," he said. "Before you?" Lucia asked. He paused. "Before I made this place mine." Lucia set her bundle down. "Do you live alone?" "Yes." "And you have lived so for years?" "Yes." Lucia looked around as if expecting someone to step out from behind the door. "Then why marry at all?" Marco's eyes moved to the window, to the strip of sea beyond. "Because the world is not kind to a woman alone." Lucia's throat tightened again. She turned away so he would not see. "The world is not kind to many people." Marco's gaze returned to her. "But it is crueler to you." Lucia swallowed. She walked to the table and placed her bundle on it. "Where do I put these?" "In the chest," Marco said, pointing. Lucia opened the chest. It smelled faintly of salt and clean wood. She placed her things inside with careful hands, as if arranging them might arrange her future, too. When she straightened, Marco was still standing near the door. He looked uncertain, and the sight of uncertainty on him felt strange. Lucia asked, "Do you regret this?" "No," Marco said immediately. "Then why do you look as if you expect me to flee?" Marco's mouth tightened. "Many would." Lucia held his gaze. "I am not many." A brief silence fell. The sea whispered outside. Lucia's pulse thudded in her ears. Marco cleared his throat. "There is bread, cheese, olives. Eat, if you wish." Lucia almost laughed. Eat! It had been his first instruction, and it was his second. It was the most intimate kindness she had received in weeks. She sat at the table. Marco set food before her without ceremony. He did not hover. He did not watch her chew. He moved about, checking the latch, setting a bucket near the hearth, placing a folded blanket on the chair. Lucia ate slowly, feeling the warmth spread through her. She watched him between bites. After a time she said, "You spoke in the church." Marco glanced at her. "Yes." "You did not have to," Lucia said. "I did," he replied simply. Lucia's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "They will speak more now." "They were already speaking," Marco answered. Lucia looked down. "I am tired of being a subject," Marco said. "Then be the one who decides." She lifted her eyes. "Decides what?" He hesitated. "How you will live here. What you will tolerate, what you will not." Lucia's voice came out softer. "And what will you tolerate?" Marco looked at her for a long moment. "Not disrespect toward you. Not in my house." The words settled over Lucia like a vow that mattered more than the priest's formal phrases. She felt something in her chest loosen, just a little, as if a knot had been pulled. She finished eating and stood. "I will clean the dishes." Marco nodded. "Do what you wish." That too was strange. No order, no tone of ownership, just space. As evening fell, Lucia moved through the cottage, learning it. She swept. She arranged the shelf. She folded the blanket. She found a small tin box with needles and thread and felt absurdly like crying, because it meant there would be mending, and mending meant time, and time meant she might remain. Marco returned briefly with a bundle of nets, salt on his cuffs. He said, "I will mend these." "I can help," Lucia offered. Marco shook his head. "Not tonight. You have done enough." Lucia wanted to argue, but her limbs ached with the day. She sat on the chair and watched him work, his hands moving with practiced care. She found herself speaking without planning to. "Did you ever want something else?" Marco did not look up. "Something else?" "A different life," Lucia said. "Away from the sea." His fingers paused for the slightest moment, then resumed. "Everyone wants different things at different times." Lucia pressed quietly. "And you?" Marco's voice was even. "I want peace." The simplicity of it made Lucia's throat tighten. Peace. She wanted it too, but she had begun to suspect peace was a luxury. She rose and went to the window. The shore was dim, the boats black against the fading light. It was not a grand life. It was not the life she had been promised by a count in a garden, but the air felt cleaner here than in the town square. Behind her, Marco said, "You can sleep in the bed. I will take the chair." Lucia turned sharply. "No." Marco stilled. "No? You are not a guest in your own house," Lucia said, "and I will not begin this marriage with you punishing yourself as if I am too fragile to share a room." Marco's gaze held hers. "It is not punishment." "Then what is it?" Lucia demanded, surprised by the fierceness of her own voice. "If you offered me marriage, accept it fully. Do not leave me alone in the dark like a charity case." Marco's jaw tightened. He looked away, as if weighing something. Then he nodded once. "Very well." Lucia's chest rose and fell. She had expected him to argue. She had expected the world again to deny her simple dignity. Instead, he yielded with a restraint that felt like respect. They prepared for night with the awkwardness of two strangers bound by vows. Lucia washed at a basin, turned her face away, kept her movements brisk and practical. Marco did the same, keeping his back respectfully angled. When Lucia sat on the edge of the bed, she realized her hands were trembling. Not from fear of him, from the sheer strangeness of being someone's wife when yesterday she had been treated as no one. Marco sat on the other side of the bed, leaving a space between them that felt deliberate. He did not reach for her. He did not speak of love. He said quietly, "If you are frightened, say so." Lucia swallowed. "I am not frightened." Marco nodded, accepting it as truth. Silence stretched. Lucia listened to the sea. She listened to Marco's steady breathing. Then, as if remembering something, Marco rose. "I must do one thing." Lucia sat up. "Now?" "Yes," Marco said. He crossed to a small writing desk near the shelf. Lucia had not noticed it earlier. It was plain, but cared for. Marco lit a candle. He took a sheet of paper from a drawer, then a small bottle of ink. Lucia watched, puzzled, as he wrote quickly, his hand moving with a smooth confidence that did not belong to a man who spent his days pulling nets. Lucia did not speak at first. She told herself it was none of her business. But when he finished, he folded the paper neatly and reached for a stick of sealing wax. Her breath caught. Marco held the wax over the candle flame with practiced ease. He let a drop fall onto the fold. Then he reached into his pocket and drew out a ring. Lucia's eyes fixed on it. Not a fisherman's ring, not a simple band. It was heavier, darker, and when he pressed it into the softened wax, it left a clean mark. A crest. Marco lifted the letter, watched the wax set, then moved quickly as if he had sensed Lucia's gaze. He slid the letter into a hidden compartment beneath the desk and pushed it shut. Then he curled his hand around the ring and turned toward her. Lucia's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Marco." He froze. Lucia pointed, her heart pounding. "What is that?" Marco's face was still, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Go to sleep, Lucia." She stared at him. "That is not an answer." Marco held the ring tighter. "It is enough for tonight." Lucia's mouth went dry. "You said you wanted honesty." Marco's gaze did not soften. "I said I would not demand softness you cannot give. I did not say I would give you my past." Lucia stood, the blanket sliding from her shoulders. "Then why marry at all?" Marco took a slow breath. For a moment, he looked as if he might speak. Then he looked away, toward the desk, toward the hidden compartment. Lucia stepped closer. "I am your wife." Marco's voice was quiet, controlled. "You are." "Then do not treat me like a child," Lucia said. Marco's jaw tightened. "Do not treat me like a man who owes you explanations on the first day." Lucia flinched, and anger rose to cover the sting. "I did not ask for your life story. I asked what crest you carry in your pocket like contraband." Marco's eyes flashed, brief and unreadable. He moved past her toward the bed. "Enough." Lucia turned with him, refusing to be dismissed. "If your secrets bring danger to this house—" "There is no danger," Marco said too quickly. Lucia saw it then. Not danger from the sea, not from storms or hunger, but from something he did not want named. She whispered, "Who are you?" Marco's hand went to the ring again, as if to ensure it was still there, still hidden in his fist. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened the drawer of the desk, took out a small cloth, and wrapped the ring in it with careful hands. He slid it into another compartment beneath the floorboard near the hearth, pressed the board down, and smoothed the edge with the toe of his boot. Lucia watched him tuck the seal away, marked with a crest, and realized she had married a man who was guarding a name he would not speak. Morning came with the sound of gulls and the stubborn knowledge that Lucia could not undo what she had seen the night before. Marco rose early, as if the question she had asked belonged to another world. Lucia watched him pull on his worn coat and tie his boots with practiced calm. She waited for him to speak. He did not. When he reached for the door, she said, "You told me to sleep." Marco paused with his hand on the latch. "And you did not?" "No," Lucia replied. "I did not." He turned slightly. His face was composed, but his eyes were guarded. "Eat what you wish. There is bread." Lucia's throat tightened. "Is that all you have to say?" Marco looked at her fully then. "What do you want me to say, Lucia? I want you to answer me." His jaw tightened the same way it had in the church. "Not today." Lucia took a step toward him. "When?" Then, Marco's voice stayed quiet. When it is necessary. Lucia let out a short breath. It felt necessary last night. Marco held her gaze. Last night was your first night here. You were tired. You were frightened, even if you would not admit it. I was not frightened of you, Lucia said quickly. Marco's eyes flickered. No, the single word carried something she could not name. Relief, perhaps, or a pain he had learned to keep hidden. Lucia pressed, "If you have enemies—" "I do not," he said, too quickly again. Lucia crossed her arms. "Then why hide a crest under the floor?" Marco's mouth tightened. "Because some things are not for the village." "And I am the village?" Lucia asked, sharper than she meant. Marco's gaze softened a fraction, then hardened again, as if he regretted the softness. "You are my wife," he said. "That does not mean I can lay my past on your shoulders in a day." Lucia heard the word shoulders and felt her pride flare. "You laid your name on me in a day." Marco did not flinch. "My name protects you," Lucia swallowed. "So it is protection." Marco opened the door. "It is life." He stepped out, and the sea air rushed in behind him, as if to erase the conversation. Lucia stood alone for a long moment. Then she forced herself to move, because standing still had become a kind of surrender. She washed the basin and swept the floor again, though it was already clean. She stacked the plates. She found the tin of needles and thread, and sat with a net Marco had left folded on a chair. Her fingers knew little of nets. Still, thread was thread, and mending was mending. She worked slowly at first, then faster as her hands learned the rhythm. When the sun climbed, she heard voices outside. "Marco," a woman called. Lucia's heart tightened. She set the net aside and went to the door. Two women stood a few paces away. One was broad-shouldered and older, with a headscarf tied tight and arms that looked strong enough to lift barrels. The other was younger, narrow-faced, with eyes that flicked quickly over Lucia's dress and hair and then away again. The older one did not bother with pleasantries. "You are the new wife." Lucia lifted her chin. "I am Lucia Conti." The younger woman's eyebrows lifted at the name, as if Lucia had claimed too much by speaking it. The older woman nodded once. "Caterina. People call me Nonna, though I have no patience for the word. This is Livia." Livia's lips pressed together in something that might have been a smile if it had contained warmth. "We brought salt." Lucia stared. "Salt?" Nonna Caterina thrust a small pouch toward her. "For your fish. Marco sells well because he salts properly." Lucia took the pouch cautiously. "Thank you," Livia said. "Marco is at sea?" "He left early," Lucia answered. Nonna Caterina's eyes narrowed slightly. "Good. He works. And you?" Lucia felt the question like a hook. "I am mending a net." Nonna Caterina made a sound that could have been approval. "Show me." Lucia hesitated, then stepped aside. They entered without waiting to be invited, as if the village had decided the cottage belonged to everyone's scrutiny. Lucia led them to the chair where the net lay. Nonna Caterina bent, examined Lucia's stitches and snorted. "You have thread too tight," she said. "It will tear when it is pulled." Lucia's cheeks warmed. "I am learning." Nonna Caterina took the net from her hands. "Then learn correctly." She sat, threaded the needle, and began to stitch with swift, sure movements. "You were raised with linen and lace," she said, "not rope." Lucia stiffened. "I was raised with a father who sold grain. We were not nobility." Livia's eyes darted toward Lucia's face. "But you were respectable." The word respectable fell between them like a stone. Nonna Caterina did not look up. "Respectable is a cloak. It keeps you warm until someone snatches it." Lucia's throat tightened. "They have already snatched it." Nonna Caterina's hands did not pause. "Yes, and you are still standing. That is worth something." Livia cleared her throat, uncomfortable. "The women by the well say you are bold." Lucia met her gaze. "Do they say it as praise?" Livia looked down. "They do not praise." Nonna Caterina said, "Let them chew their words. A village has nothing better to do." Lucia asked quietly, "Why did you come?" Nonna Caterina shrugged. "Because Marco married you." "And that is reason enough?" Nonna Caterina's eyes lifted then, sharp and assessing. "Marco does nothing without reason. If he did this, it is because he decided it. And if he decided it, the village will decide it too, one way or another. Better you learn how to keep your footing. Lucia's fingers tightened around the salt pouch. So you will teach me. Nonna Caterina gave a brisk nod. Someone must. Livia will not. She is too afraid of mouths. Livia bristled. I am not afraid, Nonna Caterina snorted. Then speak to her like a neighbor, not like a judge. Livia flushed and looked at Lucia. It is difficult. Lucia said, It is not difficult. It is a choice. Silence fell. Nonna Caterina finished a line of stitching and held the net out. Now you try again. Lucia took the needle. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced them steady. She copied the stitch, loosening the thread as Nonna Caterina had shown. Nonna Caterina watched a moment, then grunted. Better. Livia glanced toward the shelf of books. Marco reads, she said suddenly, as if announcing an oddity everyone already knew. Lucia's shoulders stiffened. So I have noticed. Livia's eyes sharpened with curiosity. He reads better than some men who went to school. Nonna Caterina's gaze flicked to Lucia's face. You noticed more than books, I think. Lucia's breath caught. She did not answer. Nonna Caterina leaned forward, voice lower. Listen to me, girl. Do not chase what he hides until you can stand on your own feet in this life. You will only make yourself dizzy. Lucia's pride rose. I am not a child. Nonna Caterina's expression did not soften. No, a child would cry and ask the village to fix it. You will not. That is why you must be clever. Lucia swallowed. Clever how? Nonna Caterina pointed at the net. By learning what keeps you fed. By learning what makes this house work. By giving them nothing to mock except what they already want to mock, Livia said, hesitant. They will mock no matter what. Lucia's mouth tightened. Then I will not arrange my life around their tongues. Nonna Caterina nodded as if that was the right answer. She stood. Good. Now when Marco returns, you go with him to sell fish. Lucia blinked. Me? Yes, Nonna Caterina said. You will stand at the stall and look people in the eye. If someone speaks improperly, you will not shrink. Livia's eyes widened. They will speak improperly. Nonna Caterina's mouth curled. Then they will learn the fisherman's wife is not made of paper. When they left, Lucia's chest felt tight with a strange mix of gratitude and irritation. She did not want to need anyone's instruction, yet she could not deny that without it, she might drown in this new life. By midday, Marco returned with a modest catch. He carried the basket in one hand, his expression unreadable as always. But when he saw Lucia in the doorway, he slowed, as if checking her face for something. Lucia stepped out. Nonna Caterina came. Marco's eyebrows lifted slightly. Did she? She brought salt, Lucia added. Marco nodded once. She is practical. She said I should go with you to sell fish. Marco paused. Did she? Lucia's tone sharpened. Do you object? Marco looked at her for a beat. No. If you wish to come. I do, Lucia said, and surprised herself by meaning it. They walked toward the small row of stalls closer to the shore than the town market. Lucia carried a cloth and a small scale Marco handed her. She kept her head high, though she could feel eyes tracking her. At the stalls, a few men nodded to Marco. Some looked past Lucia as if she were not there. Others looked at her too long with a curiosity that felt like prying fingers. Marco set the fish out neatly. He began to call prices in a low voice. Lucia took her place beside him. She forced herself to meet each gaze offered. A woman approached, her basket tucked under her arm. She was dressed better than most, with a ribbon at her throat that suggested she visited the town more often than the shore. She looked at Lucia with a faint smile. So, the woman said, the story is true. Lucia kept her voice even. What story? The fisherman took you in, the woman said, eyes bright with satisfaction. How charitable. Lucia's fingers tightened on the cloth. He did not take me in. He married me. The woman's smile sharpened. Yes, that is what I meant. Lucia said. Do you want fish? The woman blinked, thrown off by the lack of obedience to her tone. Of course. I am here, am I not? Lucia picked up a fish, weighed it carefully and named the price. The woman scoffed. That is more than last week. Marco spoke then, calm. Last week was a smaller catch. The woman looked at him. And now your wife speaks for you? Marco's gaze remained steady. She speaks with me. The woman's eyes narrowed. Then she tossed coins onto the counter. Very well. Keep your fish then. I will go to men who know their place. Lucia lifted her chin. You may go wherever you wish. The woman snatched the fish anyway and walked off with stiff indignation. Lucia let out a slow breath. Her hands shook slightly. Marco did not look at her. He said softly, Good. Lucia turned to him. Good? You did not apologize, Marco said. You did not plead. Lucia's throat tightened. I am tired of pleading. Marco's voice stayed low. So am I. They sold the rest of the fish quickly after that, mostly to people who wanted food more than gossip. A boy came, eyes wide, and Lucia gave him a smaller fish for less than the asked price. Marco noticed. You lowered it, Lucia said. His mother looked tired. Marco's jaw tightened slightly, then relaxed. Fine. When the last fish was gone, Lucia wiped the stall clean. Her shoulders ached, but she felt something else too, a steadiness she had not felt in the town market. As they walked back, they passed a group of women near a well. The chatter stopped as Lucia approached. One of them, a thin woman with pursed lips, said loudly, Well, she wears the ring boldly enough. Lucia's stomach clenched. She kept walking. Another woman added, It is easy to be bold when you have nowhere else. Lucia stopped. Marco stopped beside her. He did not speak. He simply waited, as if the decision belonged to Lucia alone. Lucia turned slowly toward them. Her heart hammered. She remembered Nonna Caterina's words. Look them in the eye. She did. I wear my ring because I am married, Lucia said. If any of you have a complaint, you may speak it plainly. The thin woman's eyes widened, then narrowed. We do not complain. We observe. Lucia nodded. Then observe this. I will not answer whispers. If you speak with respect, I will reply with respect. If you do not, I will not entertain you. A third woman laughed, brittle. Listen to her, a fisherman's wife who speaks like a lady. Lucia's cheeks warmed. I speak like a person. The thin woman's mouth tightened. You will learn, Lucia. The village teaches all. Lucia held her gaze. So do I. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Marco said quietly, Come. Lucia walked away with him, her chest tight, her hands trembling. She waited until they were out of hearing. Did I make it worse? She asked, hating the vulnerability in her voice. Marco answered, They were already speaking. Lucia exhaled. It felt like a fight. Marco glanced at her. Words are not fists. Lucia looked at him sharply. No, they are sharper. Marco's eyes held hers a moment. Yes. At home, Lucia threw herself into work, as if work could stitch her thoughts together. She cleaned the small hearth. She folded nets. She measured flour. She fixed a tear in Marco's sleeve. In the late afternoon, Marco sat at the table with a small ledger. Lucia watched him write numbers with clean precision. He paused, frowned, and adjusted a column. Lucia could not hold her curiosity. Where did you learn to keep accounts like that? Marco did not look up. From needing to. That is not an answer, Lucia said. He set the quill down. Lucia, she folded her arms. You speak as if you were taught properly. You write as if you had a tutor. And last night, Marco's jaw tightened. Do not. Lucia's temper flared. Do not what? Do not notice. Do not ask. Do not think. Marco's eyes hardened, and for a heartbeat she saw the same closed door she had seen in the morning. Then, unexpectedly, his gaze softened again, as if he were making an effort not to be cruel. He said, I do not want your days filled with questions that bring you nothing but worry. Lucia's voice dropped. And if the truth brings me something, Marco's mouth tightened. It may bring you trouble. Lucia stared at him. So there is trouble. Marco's fingers tapped once on the table, a restrained gesture of impatience. There can be, if people begin to dig. Lucia leaned forward. Who would dig? A village does not dig. It gossips. It forgets. It moves on to the next story. Marco's gaze drifted toward the door. Not everyone forgets. Lucia swallowed. Who remembers you, Marco? Silence. Lucia's throat tightened. Say something. Marco's eyes returned to her. I will say this. I am here. I have chosen this life. I have chosen you. Lucia's chest tightened at the last word. Chosen me, she repeated. Marco's voice stayed steady. Yes, Lucia whispered. Why? Marco did not answer at once. Then he said, because you looked at people who were cruel to you, and you did not collapse. You stood there and demanded truth. Lucia's breath caught. Truth did not come. Marco's jaw tightened. No. Lucia leaned back slightly, as if the air in the room had shifted. That is why you chose me, Marco said quietly. It is part of it. Lucia felt her eyes sting. She blinked hard. And the rest? Marco's gaze held hers. The rest is not for speaking yet. Lucia's hands clenched, then loosened. She forced herself to steady her voice. You ask me to trust what you will not name. Marco replied, I ask you to trust what you can see. Lucia let out a short laugh that held no joy. And what can I see? Marco's expression did not change. That you are fed, that you have a roof, that no one may dismiss you from this house, that when someone insults you, I will not stand silent. Lucia stared at him. So I should accept a marriage made of protections. Marco's voice lowered. Would you prefer a marriage made of promises? The words struck her with such accuracy that she went still. Marco looked at her steadily. Promises can be broken. Protections are actions. Lucia's throat worked. You sound like a man who learned that lesson the hard way. Marco's jaw tightened again. Perhaps. Lucia looked away, breathing through the ache in her chest. She wanted to press him until the truth spilled. She wanted to shake him. She wanted to demand that he be simple because simple would be safe. But she remembered Nonna Caterina's warning. Do not chase what he hides until you can stand on your own feet. Lucia asked quieter. Will you at least tell me this? Is your secret something that would shame me? Marco's gaze sharpened. No. Would it endanger me? He hesitated. Lucia's stomach dropped. Marco. His voice came out firm. Not here. Not if we are careful. Lucia's fingers curled into a fist. Careful is another word for hiding. Marco's expression softened, and for the first time his voice carried a note of weariness. Yes. Lucia swallowed. She forced herself to speak plainly. I will learn this life. I will work. I will not be useless. But I will not be treated like a guest who should be grateful for crumbs. Marco nodded once. You will not be. Lucia lifted her chin. And one day, you will tell me. Marco held her gaze. One day. The days that followed were full, and that fullness was a kind of mercy. Lucia rose early. She swept, mended, salted fish, learned how to judge the sky without needing anyone to explain it. She went to the stalls with Marco. She endured the glances. She stopped flinching at her own name. Some people softened. A woman with a baby bought fish from Lucia and murmured, You did not deserve what they said. Lucia answered, Thank you, and let herself accept it without suspicion. Others sharpened, as if her steadiness offended them. Once at the well, the thin woman said, You walk as if you were never fallen. Lucia replied calmly, I am not fallen. I was pushed. That night, as Lucia prepared bread dough, Marco watched her hands for a moment. Then he said, You will burn it if you do not lower the fire. Lucia bristled. I know what I am doing. Marco's mouth twitched, as if he almost smiled. You do not. Lucia glared. Then teach me without sounding like an order. Marco stepped closer, not touching her, simply pointing. Here, the flame is too high, turn it. Lucia turned the knob. Like this. Marco nodded. Yes. Lucia glanced at him. You say yes as if you approve. I do, he replied. She looked away quickly, annoyed by how much she wanted that approval. Later that week, a fisherman's boy ran up to Lucia at the stalls with a scrap of paper in his hand. For you, Signora Conti, he said, breathless. Lucia took it. From whom? The boy shrugged and darted off. Lucia unfolded the paper. It was not signed. The writing was neat, angled, educated. She read it once, then again, her mouth going dry. Be cautious of smiles from fine carriages. Some men do not forget. Her hands trembled. She looked up quickly, scanning the street. She saw nothing but the usual movement of villagers and buyers. She tucked the note into her apron and forced her voice steady when Marco returned. "Someone left a message," she said. Marco's gaze sharpened. "What message?" Lucia hesitated, then handed him the paper. Marco read it, and something tightened in his face. Not fear exactly, not surprise, recognition. Lucia watched him closely. "Do you know who wrote that?" Marco's voice was careful. No, Lucia did not believe him. She did not challenge him yet. She waited because she was learning that pressing too hard only made him retreat. That afternoon, Marco went to the shore to check his boat. Lucia followed with a small basket of cloth and thread, intending to mend a torn sack near the nets. The shore was busier than usual. A few travelers had stopped near the inn. A cart stood with goods. Men spoke of weather and prices. Lucia sat on a low stone near Marco's boat and began to sew. Marco climbed into the boat, checked the ropes, adjusted the net with swift, practiced movements. He worked in silence, as always. Lucia kept her eyes on her stitches, but she could not stop listening to the voices around her. A man's voice, smoother than the others, drifted from the path near the inn. "Excuse me, may I ask a question?" Lucia looked up. A gentleman stood there, dressed too finely for a coastal village. His coat was clean, his hair neatly styled, his boots polished. He smiled as if he belonged everywhere. A few villagers looked at him with curiosity. Others looked away, wary. The gentleman approached slowly, hands open, no threat in his posture. His gaze flicked to Lucia, polite and brief, then settled on Marco's boat. "Forgive me," he said to a fisherman nearby. "I seem to have taken the wrong road. Is there a place here where one might hire passage along the coast?" The fisherman scratched his head. "We do not hire like that. We fish." The gentleman laughed softly. "Of course. I spoke carelessly. I mean only, if a man wished to travel quietly without much attention." Lucia's fingers stilled on the needle. Marco had gone very still in the boat. The gentleman's eyes moved, as if drawn by a string, directly to Marco. For a heartbeat, his smile remained. Then it changed, almost imperceptibly, into something more focused, more certain. He took one step closer and said softly, as if tasting a name, "Conti." Marco did not answer at once. He stood in the boat as if his feet had been nailed to the planks, hands resting on the rope, eyes fixed on the gentleman. Lucia rose slowly from the stone. Her needle pricked her finger, and she did not feel it. The gentleman kept his pleasant tone. "A common name," he said lightly, "and yet it suits you strangely well." A fisherman nearby chuckled, uneasy. "He is Marco Conti. That is all." The gentleman's smile remained. "Of course, that is all." Lucia stepped closer to the edge of the boat. "Sir," she said, "you have addressed my husband as if you know him." The gentleman's gaze flicked to her, sharper now, then softened into courtesy. "Your husband?" "Yes," Lucia replied. "We were married." The word married made a few heads turn. The village still tasted it as if it were a surprising spice. The gentleman bowed slightly. "Then I offer my congratulations, Signora." "Conti," Lucia said, holding his gaze. "Signora Conti," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "How fortunate you are." Lucia's mouth tightened. "Fortune is a strange thing to wish on strangers." The gentleman's eyes brightened, amused. "You have spirit." Marco finally spoke, his voice low. "What do you want?" The gentleman's smile thinned. "A conversation." "With whom?" Lucia asked. "With you," the gentleman said to Marco, then added smoothly, "Alone, if possible." Marco stepped out of the boat and onto the sand. He moved as if he were making a decision with every breath. "No," Marco said. The fisherman nearby blinked. It was not common to refuse a well-dressed man so simply. The gentleman did not look offended. "I understand. The village listens." Marco's eyes stayed cold. "Then speak here, if you must speak at all." The gentleman's gaze shifted over the boats, the nets, the men watching. He exhaled as if accepting a limitation. "Very well," he said. "I have traveled far to deliver a message." Marco's jaw tightened. "To whom?" The gentleman looked directly at him. "To a man who has been difficult to find." Lucia felt the words settle in her stomach like stones. She stepped closer to Marco's side, not touching him, but near enough that no one could pretend she was not part of this. The gentleman's tone remained mild. There are matters of family, matters of law, matters that cannot be ignored forever. Marco's voice was careful. You have the wrong man. The gentleman smiled again, as if Marco had repeated a line he expected. If you insist. Yet I was told the sea has a way of hiding what the land cannot. Lucia's fingers curled. Who told you? The gentleman's gaze returned to her. People who value discretion, Lucia said. Discretion often means harm done quietly. A few villagers shifted, uncomfortable. They did not like words that suggested their own complicity. The gentleman's smile held. You are remarkably direct, Signora Conti. Lucia answered. So is my hunger, and my patience is no longer generous. Marco's voice sharpened slightly. Enough. The gentleman lifted both hands, placating. I will not disturb your livelihood. I am not here to cause a scene. Lucia stared at him. Then why stand before his boat and call him by our name like a test? The gentleman regarded her a moment longer, then said, Because names matter. Marco's eyes hardened. Not here. The gentleman's gaze did not waver. Not here, perhaps. But elsewhere very much. Silence tightened around them. Then the gentleman glanced toward the path by the inn, as if expecting something. Lucia followed his gaze. A carriage rolled into view, slower than the Count's carriage had been, but no less certain of its welcome. It was not grand, but it was clean and well kept. Two men walked beside it, dressed neatly, carrying nothing in their hands, yet moving with the confidence of people used to command. The villagers stirred. Whispers rose. Who are they? Travelers? Officials? Marco's shoulders tightened. Lucia leaned closer to him and spoke through her teeth. Do you know them? Marco did not answer at once. Then he said, very quietly, Yes. Her stomach turned. So you lied before? Marco's eyes flicked to her. I did not know they would come today. The carriage stopped near the inn. The door opened. A man stepped down. He was not old, but he carried authority like a garment. He wore a dark coat that fit well, not ostentatious, and his hair was neatly tied back. His face was composed, his eyes observant. He approached with measured steps. Behind him, two other men followed, silent and attentive. The first gentleman who had questioned Marco bowed slightly to the newcomer. Captain Rinaldi? The newcomer nodded once. Signor Bellini? So they had names, Lucia thought. Names that the village did not know, and therefore could not judge properly. Captain Rinaldi stopped a few paces from Marco. He looked him over without rudeness, but with exactness, as if verifying what he had been told. Then he spoke, formal and calm. Marco Conti. Marco's voice was flat. That is my name. Rinaldi's gaze lingered. It is the name you use. Lucia's chest tightened. She forced herself to speak. Sir, you stand on our shore and speak as if my husband owes you something. State your business plainly. Rinaldi turned to her, and Lucia braced for condescension. Instead, his expression shifted into a careful respect, the kind given to a woman recognized as lawful rather than convenient. And you are? He asked. Lucia lifted her chin. Lucia Conti. Rinaldi nodded once. Signora Conti. Signora. Not girl. Not woman with a story. Not fallen. A proper address. Offered without warmth, but without cruelty. He looked back to Marco. I have letters for you. Marco said, I do not accept them. Rinaldi's face remained composed. You may refuse them with your hand, but the matters inside them will not disappear. Marco's jaw tightened. Speak your message then, and leave. Rinaldi did not raise his voice. He simply said, A member of your family has died. Lucia felt Marco's body go rigid beside her. The villagers leaned in without shame. Death was always good for gossip. Marco said nothing. Rinaldi continued, There are legal consequences. There are obligations. There are claims that will be made whether you present yourself or not. Marco's voice came out low. I have no family. Rinaldi's eyes narrowed slightly. That is untrue. Lucia heard the certainty and felt her skin prickle. She stepped closer, shoulder nearly brushing Marco's arm. Sir, you are disturbing the peace of this village. If you have a legal matter, take it to a court. Rinaldi looked at her. We intend to. Lucia's mouth went dry. "Here," Rinaldi said evenly. "We would prefer not." Marco spoke then, sharper. "Then go." Rinaldi held his gaze. "Not without you." A fisherman muttered, "This is not our concern." Another murmured back, "Everything becomes our concern once a carriage arrives." Lucia felt anger rise. She turned her head slightly and spoke to the men listening. "If you have nothing useful to say, go back to your nets." A few blinked, startled. Some drifted away, embarrassed at being spoken to so plainly by the woman they had been prepared to mock. Rinaldi's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly, as if Lucia's bluntness amused him. Then he reached into his coat and drew out a folded paper with a seal. He held it out toward Marco. Marco did not take it. Rinaldi said, "This concerns property." Marco's eyes flickered. Lucia caught it. Property meant more than money. It meant something that could touch their home, their boat, their life. Rinaldi's voice remained calm. "There is land. There is a title attached to it. There are signatures required. If you do not sign, others will sign in ways you will not like." Lucia said, "This is intimidation dressed as courtesy." Rinaldi turned to her. "It is reality dressed as courtesy." Marco's voice went colder. "I will not return." Rinaldi exhaled. "Then you force our hand." Lucia's heart hammered. "Your hand to do what? Drag him away?" Rinaldi's eyes remained steady. "No one will drag anyone. We are not brutes. We will apply pressure where pressure belongs." Lucia said, "Where?" Rinaldi looked past her toward the village, the inn, the stalls. Licenses, permits, debts that can be called in sooner than expected, friendly arrangements that can become difficult. Lucia felt her stomach drop. No weapons, no fists, no shouting. Just the slow tightening of life until it became impossible to breathe. Marco's voice was low. "Leave her out of this." Rinaldi's gaze returned to Marco. "That depends on you." Lucia snapped. "Do not speak as if I am a token." Rinaldi regarded her for a beat. "Then do not stand between forces that do not care about your pride." Lucia's hands shook. "My pride is all I have left." Marco's voice softened slightly, and it was the softness that startled her. "Lucia." She looked at him. His eyes held hers in a steady, warning glance, as if asking her to step back before she was crushed by a world he understood too well. Lucia wanted to refuse. She wanted to prove she could stand against anything. But she remembered what it felt like when Count Vittorio's threats came wrapped in silk. She remembered how easily doors closed. She remembered the hunger. She swallowed hard and said quieter, "If they can tighten the village around us, then we cannot pretend this is nothing." Marco's jaw worked. "I know." Rinaldi took a small step forward. "We will return tomorrow." Marco said, "Do not." Rinaldi replied, "We will." Signor Bellini, the first gentleman, spoke up smoothly. "Captain, perhaps we should allow them the evening to consider." Rinaldi nodded slightly. "Yes." He turned to Marco again. "You will meet me at the inn at dawn." Marco's face was still. "No." Rinaldi's expression did not change. "Then I will come here again, and again, and the village will hear more each time." Lucia heard the threat. Exposure by repetition. Make the secret ordinary by speaking it near enough that everyone could taste it. Rinaldi bowed slightly, first to Marco, then surprisingly to Lucia. "Signora Conti." Lucia's jaw tightened. She did not bow back. Rinaldi turned and walked away with his men. Bellini followed, glancing once more at Marco with a look that was not quite triumph and not quite pity. The carriage rolled away toward the inn. When they were gone, the shore seemed too loud, full of whispers that had been held back by the visitor's presence. A fisherman called, "Marco, what is this?" Marco did not answer. Another muttered, "Officials here? For you?" Lucia turned sharply to them. "Leave him alone." A few laughed under their breath. Lucia stepped forward, anger giving her courage. "If you have questions, ask with respect, or go back to your work." One man scoffed, "Respect is earned." Lucia's eyes narrowed. "Then earn it yourselves." Marco spoke quietly. "Lucia." She turned to him, breath tight. "Do not ask me to be silent." He did not. He only said, "Come home." They walked back with the sea wind at their backs and the village's eyes on their shoulders. At the cottage, Lucia shut the door and pressed her back to it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lucia said very softly, "A title." Marco's head lifted. "You heard him," Lucia continued. "Land. A title. Signatures. What are you hiding from me?" Marco's voice was flat. "I told you. Not yet." Lucia's temper flared again. "Not yet is a luxury I do not have." Marco's jaw tightened. "You think I do not know that?" Lucia stepped closer. "Then tell me." Marco looked away, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was controlled. "If I tell you, you will not sleep." "I did not sleep already," Lucia said. Marco's gaze snapped back to her, and for a moment his eyes looked raw. "Then you understand." Lucia's anger faltered, not because she forgave him, but because she saw something in him she had not allowed herself to see. Fear held in a disciplined hand. She swallowed. "Those men will tighten life around us." Marco nodded once. "Yes," Lucia whispered. "So you do have enemies." Marco's mouth tightened. "I have obligations I do not want." Lucia's eyes stung. "You married me while carrying obligations that could crush us." Marco spoke quietly. "I married you because you would have starved." Lucia flinched. "So I am a duty too." Marco shook his head sharply. "No, do not twist it." "Then explain it," Lucia demanded. Marco's voice rose slightly, not in volume, but in intensity. "I did not marry you to soothe my conscience. I married you because I saw what they did to you, and I refused to let it continue." Lucia's breath caught. "Refused." Marco's jaw tightened. "Yes," Lucia's voice dropped. "And did you refuse because you are kind, or because you know what it is to be watched and judged?" Marco's silence answered too much. Lucia stepped back, pressing a hand to her mouth as if to hold her thoughts in. "You have lived among people like that," she whispered. "People who send carriages and speak softly while they squeeze." Marco's gaze lowered. Lucia took a slow breath. "All right, if you will not tell me everything, tell me this. Can they take our house?" Marco's eyes lifted. "Not easily." "Can they take your boat?" Marco hesitated. "They can make it difficult to sell. They can make it difficult to dock. They can make it difficult to breathe." Lucia's stomach turned. "And you call that not easily?" Marco's voice came out tired. "I call it slower." Lucia let out a short, bitter laugh. "Slower is still death, Marco. Only without mercy." Marco stepped toward her, and for the first time he reached out, not touching her, but hovering close as if he wanted to steady her and did not know if he was allowed. "Lucia," he said, softer. "Look at me." She did, though her eyes burned. He spoke slowly. "You are not alone now." Lucia swallowed. "I was not alone when I was promised marriage by a count. I was surrounded by people then, too." Marco's face tightened at the word count. Lucia noticed. "You know him." Marco's jaw clenched. "I know of him." Lucia's voice sharpened. "Does he know of you?" Marco did not answer. Lucia's breath caught. "Marco!" He looked away. Lucia stepped closer, voice trembling. "If Vittorio Alessi is connected to this—" Marco cut in, firm. "Do not say his name in this house." Lucia stared at him. "So he is connected." Marco's eyes held hers, and in them she saw a warning that chilled her more than any shouted threat could have. Lucia whispered, "Then my scandal and your secrets are tangled." Marco's voice was low. "Perhaps." Lucia felt suddenly dizzy. "Is that why he looked so pleased when he dismissed me? Because he knew I would fall into your life as if into a net?" Marco's face hardened. "He does not control you." Lucia's throat tightened. "He controlled the town." Marco stepped closer again. This time his hand touched her arm briefly. A light pressure, not possessive, just anchoring. "He cannot control what we do next," Marco said. Lucia's breath hitched at the word we. She forced herself to focus. "What do we do next?" Marco withdrew his hand and moved toward the small desk. He opened the drawer, took out a blank paper, then stopped. Lucia watched him. "You were going to write?" Marco's voice was careful. "Yes." "To whom?" she demanded. Marco's hand tightened on the paper. Someone who can delay matters. Lucia's mouth went dry. So there are people who know you. Marco did not deny it. Lucia's voice shook with restrained fury. And you would rather write to them than speak to me. Marco's eyes lifted. I would rather keep you safe. Lucia snapped. Safe is not the same as respected. Marco's jaw tightened. You want respect from a world that does not know how to give it. Lucia's eyes flashed. I want respect from my husband. The word husband hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Marco stared at her for a long moment. Then he set the paper down slowly. You are right, he said quietly. Lucia's breath caught. She had not expected agreement. Marco continued, his voice controlled. You deserve to know what you stepped into, but not because you demand it like a judge, because you are my wife. Lucia swallowed hard. Then tell me. Marco took a slow breath, as if choosing each word with care. I was born into a house that was not mine by choice, he said. A house that expects obedience, appearances, alliances. Lucia's chest tightened. A noble house. Marco's eyes did not flinch. Yes. Lucia's hands trembled. And you left it? Marco nodded. I left before they could bind me. Lucia whispered. Bind you to what? Marco's mouth tightened. To decisions made without my consent. Lucia thought of Vittorio's smooth threats. She thought of doors closing. And now they have found you. Marco's voice was low. They have been searching. They become more persistent when there is a death. Lucia's stomach tightened. So someone died, and now you are needed. Marco's gaze dropped. Yes? Lucia's throat felt tight. Are you important? Marco's jaw clenched. Important enough to be inconvenient. Lucia's mind spun. Marco, he looked at her. Do not ask for the name yet. Lucia almost laughed, breathless. You give me nobility, and still you hold back the name. Marco's voice softened. Because once you have the name, you have the danger fully. And I have no right to place it in your hands unless you choose it. Lucia's eyes stung. Did I choose it when I married you? Marco's gaze held hers. You chose me as you saw me, not as I was born. Lucia whispered, and would you have offered marriage if I had known? Marco hesitated. I do not know. The honesty struck her more than any polished lie could have. Lucia turned away, pressing her fingers to her temple. Marco said quietly, I will not let them harm you. Lucia laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. They do not need to touch me to harm me. They can do it with papers and smiles. Marco's jaw tightened. Then we will answer with papers and resolve. Lucia turned back. What does that mean? Marco's gaze shifted toward the door. It means we may have to leave. Lucia's stomach dropped. Leave this village. Marco nodded once. If they tighten it enough. Lucia's voice shook. This village is harsh, but it is still a place I fought to stand in. I will not be chased again. Marco's eyes held hers. Then you must understand what you are fighting. Lucia whispered. Tell me what you are. Marco's face went still. His eyes seemed suddenly far away, as if he were seeing another room, another set of rules. He spoke very quietly. I am someone they will call back whether I want it or not. Lucia stepped forward, heart hammering. A duke. Marco's mouth tightened. No, a prince, she whispered, and the word felt ridiculous in the small cottage with salt on the table. Marco did not answer. Lucia's breath caught painfully. Marco. Before he could speak, there was a knock at the door. Both of them froze. The knock came again, firm but not rude. Lucia moved first because she refused to cower in her own house. She opened the door. Captain Rinaldi stood there with Signor Bellini beside him. Two other men waited a few paces behind, watching the path as if guarding the moment from interruption. Rinaldi inclined his head. Signora Conti. Lucia kept her voice even. Captain. Rinaldi's gaze flicked past her to Marco. It is earlier than dawn, he said mildly. I decided not to disturb the innkeeper with repeated requests. He is nervous. Lucia's jaw tightened. You enjoy making people nervous. Rinaldi's expression did not change. I enjoy efficiency. Marco stepped forward. Speak then. Rinaldi held out another sealed paper. This is a formal summons. It requests your presence. Marco did not take it. Rinaldi's tone remained calm. You may refuse to touch it, but it remains valid. Lucia said, "You came here to trap him with words." Rinaldi turned to her. "No, signora. I came to retrieve him with dignity." Lucia's stomach tightened. "Retrieve?" Rinaldi looked back to Marco. "There are people waiting. There are matters that cannot proceed without you." Marco's voice was low. "Proceed to what?" Rinaldi's gaze held his. "To succession." The word fell into the cottage like a weight. Lucia's breath stopped. Marco's face went very still. Rinaldi's voice softened only slightly. "A seat is empty. The council will not wait forever. If you do not appear, they will fill it with someone else. And you know what that means." Marco's jaw clenched. "I left that life." Rinaldi nodded as if acknowledging a childish insistence. "And yet, it remains yours." Lucia's voice came out strained. "Marco." He did not look at her. Lucia turned to Rinaldi. "Captain, whatever you think you are doing it in my home." Rinaldi inclined his head again. "That is why I will speak plainly now, so your home is not forced into whispers." He stepped forward one pace, still outside the threshold, as if respecting the boundary while claiming authority all the same. Then he looked directly at Marco and said with formal precision, "Your Highness." Lucia did not breathe. The words stayed suspended between the doorway and the hearth, as if the air itself refused to carry them away. "Your Highness." Marco's face went still, not blank, not calm, still, as if every muscle had been trained to reveal nothing at the moment it mattered most. Captain Rinaldi waited, patient, almost respectful. Beside him, Signor Bellini kept his eyes lowered, as if the truth required a certain posture. Lucia heard her own voice, faint and disbelieving. "No." Rinaldi's gaze shifted to her. "Signora Conti." Lucia shook her head once. "He is a fisherman." Rinaldi replied evenly, "He is many things." Lucia turned to Marco, searching his face for denial. Marco. He did not look at her at first. He looked past her, toward the door, toward Rinaldi, toward the world that had just stepped into their cottage and claimed it. Then Marco's eyes met Lucia's. In that look, Lucia found no mockery, no triumph, only a quiet sorrow, as if he had known this day would arrive and had feared it for her more than for himself. Lucia whispered, "Is it true?" Marco's jaw tightened. He spoke softly, but the words landed heavy. "Yes." Lucia's knees threatened to fold. She steadied herself by gripping the edge of the door. Rinaldi inclined his head again. "Your Highness, forgive the intrusion, but time has become impatient." Marco's voice went colder. "Do not call me that in my house." Rinaldi's expression did not change. "In your house you may be Marco Conti. Outside it the law speaks differently." Lucia swallowed hard. "The law?" Rinaldi looked at her as if choosing words that would not insult her intelligence. "There is a principality, a council, a line of succession, a household staff that has lived in uncertainty, and a people who will be told something soon, whether you wish it or not." Marco's mouth tightened. "They can be told I am dead." Rinaldi's eyes narrowed slightly. "That rumor was attempted. It did not hold. Too many remembered you breathing." Lucia flinched. "Remembered?" Marco said sharply, "Say what you came to say." Rinaldi nodded once and drew out a sealed packet. "Your brother has died." Lucia's hand flew to her mouth. Brother. A brother meant family, blood, rank. It also meant grief, sudden and real, not merely political. Marco's eyes did not change, but his throat worked once. "When?" Rinaldi answered. 3 weeks ago." Marco's fingers curled at his side. "And only now you come?" Rinaldi's tone remained controlled. "We searched. You were careful." Lucia heard the pain in the plainness of that. Marco had not simply wandered away. He had disappeared on purpose. Rinaldi continued. "The council has called for the next step. There are formalities. There are vows to the state. There is a need for clarity." Marco's voice was low. "Clarity." Rinaldi's gaze held his. "Herr Prince does not belong only to himself." Lucia's stomach turned. The sentence sounded like a chain. She forced herself to speak, voice tight. "He is my husband." Rinaldi turned to her, and for the first time his expression softened a fraction, the way a man might acknowledge a truth he cannot undo. "Yes, that is why I have come with courtesy. Lucia's eyes flashed. Courtesy would have been leaving us alone, Rinaldi replied calmly. Courtesy is not always possible, but dignity is, Marco said. What do you want from me exactly? Rinaldi raised the packet slightly. Your presence, your signature, your public acknowledgement? Marco's jaw tightened. And if I refuse? Rinaldi's voice remained even. Then the council will proceed without you. They will declare you unfit, absent, unreliable. They will place power in other hands. Lucia's chest tightened. Other hands like Count Vittorio Alessi? Silence. Rinaldi did not answer at once. He only looked at Lucia with that measured respect again, as if she had spoken a name that mattered more than a village scandal. Marco's head snapped slightly toward Lucia. Do not. Lucia stared at Marco. So he is involved, Rinaldi said quietly. Count Alessi has influence. He always has. Lucia's voice shook with anger. He ruined me. Marco's eyes tightened. Lucia. She turned on him, trembling. Do not hush me now. You let me believe I had fallen into misfortune alone. And all this time I was standing on the edge of something larger. Marco's face looked carved from restraint. Not here. Lucia's voice rose. Where then? In a palace. In front of a council. In front of people who will decide if I am worthy to stand beside you. Rinaldi shifted slightly, uncomfortable at being witness to a private fracture. Signora, Lucia cut him off. Do not speak to me as if I am an inconvenience. I am his wife. Rinaldi inclined his head, accepting the correction. Yes. Marco drew a slow breath. Captain, leave us. Rinaldi hesitated. Your high... Marco's eyes sharpened. Leave. Rinaldi paused, then nodded once. We will be at the inn. By sunset, you will give an answer. Marco said, You will not return to this door. Rinaldi's mouth tightened. If there is no answer, we will return. Lucia's hands shook, but she kept her voice steady. You have your answer already. He will not be summoned like a servant. Rinaldi looked at her a moment. No one here has called him a servant. Lucia replied, Yet you speak of him as property. Rinaldi's gaze returned to Marco. We speak of him as responsibility. Marco said, Go. Rinaldi bowed stiffly and stepped away. Bellini followed, eyes down. The two men behind them moved like shadows, not threatening, simply present. When they were gone, Marco shut the door himself. Lucia turned toward him immediately. Tell me. Marco did not move at once. He stood with his hand on the latch, head slightly lowered, as if holding the world outside at bay. Lucia's voice cracked. Tell me now, or I will go back to the town and let them invent whatever tale they like. At least then, the lies will be mine to choose. Marco's head lifted. His eyes met hers, and Lucia saw it clearly. Not deception for pleasure, but silence for survival. That did not soothe her. It only made it more tragic. He spoke quietly. Sit. Lucia almost refused out of stubbornness. Then she realized her legs truly did not trust her. She sat on the chair by the hearth, hands clenched in her lap. Marco remained standing. I did not marry you to trap you, he said. Lucia's laugh was thin. Then why does it feel like a net closing? Marco's jaw tightened. Because my life before this was made of nets. I have been trying to cut my way out of them. Lucia swallowed. Who are you? Marco's voice lowered. My name is Marco di Monterossa. The name meant nothing to Lucia, and yet it sounded like stone and bells and official rooms. And what is Monterossa? She whispered. A small principality, Marco replied. On this coast, not far. Small enough that men like Alessi think they can steer it with their hands. Lucia stared. You are... the prince. Marco's mouth tightened. I am the second son. My older brother was to rule. I was meant to support him. Lucia's throat tightened. And now he is dead. Marco's gaze dropped. Yes. Lucia pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow her breathing. So now they want you. Marco nodded once. They have always wanted something. A marriage, an alliance, a signature, a face to put on a decision already made. Lucia whispered, And you ran. Marco's voice stayed controlled. I left. Lucia's eyes burned. You left and became a fisherman. Marco's gaze lifted. I became a man who could breathe. Lucia's hands trembled. And you became my husband. Marco stepped closer, stopping a pace away as if unsure of his right to approach. Yes. Lucia's voice cracked. Did you love me? Marco's expression tightened, as if the word love was both too precious and too dangerous. I did not marry you for love, he said carefully. Not at first. Lucia flinched as if struck. At first, Marco continued quickly. I married you because you were being crushed and no one would stop it. Because I could stop it. Lucia's eyes filled. She blinked hard. So I was your good deed. Marco's jaw clenched. No. Lucia's voice rose. Then what was I? Marco's voice softened, and it was that softness that made Lucia's breath catch. You were the first person I saw stand in the middle of judgment and refuse to beg. And you did it with nothing in your hands but dignity. Lucia whispered. Dignity did not feed me. Marco nodded. That is why I offered food and a name. Not because you were weak, because the world was unjust. Lucia's throat worked. You could have helped without marrying me. Marco's eyes held hers. No, not in a way that would hold. Lucia exhaled shakily. And you hid your name. Marco's face tightened. Yes. Lucia's voice dropped to a painful calm. Why? Marco looked away, then back. Because if anyone connected you to me, you would be watched by people who do not gossip like villagers. They ruin quietly. They ruin thoroughly. Lucia's fingers curled. Like Vittorio. Marco's jaw tightened at the name. Yes. Lucia leaned forward. Tell me the truth, is he connected to your court? Marco hesitated a fraction too long. Lucia's stomach turned. He is. Marco spoke slowly. He has sought influence there for years. He attaches himself to power the way a vine attaches itself to a wall. Lucia's eyes flashed with fury. And I was a stepping stone. Marco's gaze sharpened. You were a person he treated as disposable. That is not strategy. That is cruelty. Lucia's voice shook. He promised to marry me. Marco's jaw clenched. He promised you what served him. Lucia's eyes burned. And when I demanded he speak truth, he threatened to take my last chance at decency. Marco's hands clenched. He did not speak for a moment. Then he said very quietly, he will not threaten you again. Lucia laughed once, bitter. How will you stop him? With a title? Marco's gaze held hers. With what I have always tried to avoid. With the authority I ran from. Lucia's breath caught. So we must go. Marco nodded once. Yes. Lucia swallowed hard. And what happens to me when we go? Marco's voice was careful, almost gentle. What you choose. Lucia's eyes narrowed. Do not give me words that sound kind and mean abandonment. Marco stepped closer. I will not abandon you. Lucia's voice dropped. But you will offer it. Marco's jaw tightened. Because it is your right. You married a fisherman. You did not marry a prince. Lucia stared. The sentence should have sounded noble. It sounded like a knife made of propriety. She rose abruptly. No. Marco blinked. No? Lucia's eyes flashed. Do not speak as if I am an error you must correct politely. I am your wife. Marco's face tightened with emotion. He tried to keep under control. Yes. Lucia stepped closer until the space between them was thin. Say it plainly, Marco di Monterossa. If I go with you, will you stand beside me openly? Marco's throat worked. Yes. Lucia's voice shook. Even if they whisper, yes. Even if they call me unworthy. Marco's jaw clenched. Yes. Lucia stared at him a long moment. Then she whispered, Then I will go. Marco's eyes softened, and in that softness, Lucia felt the first true tenderness between them, not born of necessity, but of choice. He reached out, hesitated, then took her hand carefully, as if asking permission. Lucia did not pull away. That evening, they went to the inn. The village watched them walk as if watching a play whose ending could not be guessed. Lucia held her chin high and kept her hand in Marco's. At the inn, Captain Rinaldi stood near the hearth. He looked up as they entered and nodded once, as if he had expected nothing else. You have decided, he said. Marco's voice was steady. We go tomorrow. Rinaldi's gaze flicked to Lucia. We. Lucia met his eyes. Yes, We. Rinaldi inclined his head, and for the first time Lucia saw something like approval. Very well, signora. Lucia's jaw tightened. Do not call me signora, as if it is a courtesy you may remove when convenient. Rinaldi held her gaze. It will not be removed. Lucia did not relax, but she remembered the words. They travelled the next morning with no spectacle, no parade, no shouting. Just a carriage, a few attendants, and a road that turned familiar sea air into something that smelled of stone and rules. Lucia sat inside beside Marco, hands folded tight. She watched him stare out the window like a man preparing to walk into a room that would measure him from head to toe. After a long silence, Lucia said quietly, "Do you regret marrying me?" Marco turned to her. "No." Lucia's throat tightened. "Even now?" Marco's voice was low. "Especially now." Lucia swallowed. "Then do not let them make me small." Marco's eyes held hers. "They will try. But they cannot do it unless you agree." Lucia exhaled. "I agreed once when I begged for truth in the market." Marco's jaw tightened. "You did not beg. You demanded." Lucia gave a short, humorless laugh. "And still I lost." Marco's gaze softened. "Not this time." When the principality came into view, it was not a grand kingdom. It was a coastal seat with old stone walls, a modest palace, banners that fluttered as if determined to look important in the sea wind. Rinaldi guided them through gates where guards bowed to Marco with practiced formality. Lucia's stomach twisted. Every bow felt like a reminder that Marco had never been meant to haul nets. Inside, servants watched Lucia openly, eyes quick and curious. Lucia refused to lower her gaze. An elderly man approached, dressed in formal black, his face lined with controlled emotion. He bowed deeply to Marco. "Your Highness," he said, voice thick, "we feared we would never see you again." Marco's jaw tightened. "I am here." The old man's eyes shifted to Lucia. "And this is—" Lucia spoke before Marco could soften it into omission. "Lucia Conti, his wife." The old man blinked. For a heartbeat, the palace seemed to hold its breath. Then the old man bowed to Lucia as well, not as deeply, but with unmistakable recognition. "Signora?" Lucia swallowed hard, surprised by the simple correctness of it. Marco glanced at her, a silent question in his eyes. "Are you steady?" Lucia squeezed his hand once, brief and firm. They were given rooms in a quieter wing, away from the busiest corridors. Lucia understood the gesture. They were being kept from immediate scrutiny, perhaps as mercy, perhaps as containment. Soon after, a meeting was announced. "The council gathers within the hour," Rinaldi said, standing by their door. "They require your presence, your Highness." Marco's jaw tightened. "And my wife?" Rinaldi hesitated a fraction. "That will be discussed." Lucia's hands curled. "Discussed as if I am a stain to be scrubbed." Rinaldi's gaze held hers. "Discussed as a legal reality." Lucia stepped forward. "I will not be hidden." Marco's voice was calm but unyielding. "She comes with me." Rinaldi exhaled as if he had expected the conflict. "Very well, but understand the room you enter is not a village market. Your words will echo." Lucia replied, "Let them echo." In the corridor outside the council chamber, Lucia saw him. Count Vittorio Alessi stood near a tall window, speaking with a woman dressed in elegant restraint. Donna Elisabetta, Lucia guessed immediately, because they were faces that lived for judgment. Vittorio turned at their approach. His eyes widened only slightly. Then his mouth curved into that familiar, smooth smile. "Lucia," he said softly, as if greeting an old friend at a concert. "How far you have traveled." Lucia felt her vision narrow. She stepped forward. "So you knew." Vittorio's gaze slid to Marco. "Your Highness," he said, bowing with perfect form. Marco's face did not change. "Count Alessi." Elisabetta's eyes swept Lucia from head to toe, lingering on her plain ring as if it offended her. "So this is the wife," she said. "How unexpected." Lucia's jaw tightened. "How inconvenient, you mean?" Elisabetta's eyebrows lifted. "You speak boldly for someone in your position." Lucia held her gaze. "I speak plainly, because I am done with whispers." Vittorio sighed, feigning regret. "Lucia, truly, you make everything harder than it needs to be." Lucia's hands trembled. Harder? You made my life impossible, and you speak of difficulty as if I am the one who enjoys it. Vittorio's smile remained. You were always dramatic. Marco spoke quietly, and the quiet carried more force than any raised voice. Do not address my wife that way. Elisabetta's lips tightened. Your Highness, you must understand. This is not personal. It is propriety. Lucia almost laughed. Propriety did not stop your brother from promising me marriage and then vanishing. Vittorio's smile finally faltered. Brother, Lucia stared at him. Do not pretend you do not know. You used your name to close doors against me. You told the town silence was wisdom. It was convenient for you. Vittorio's gaze sharpened. Be careful. Marco stepped slightly in front of Lucia, not blocking her, but signaling that any threat would have to pass through him first. Elisabetta said coolly, We will discuss this inside. Lucia replied, I am not afraid of rooms. Vittorio's eyes flicked to Marco again, and Lucia caught something there. Calculation, weighing, as if he had not anticipated this exact shape of complication. The council chamber was not large. A long table, several men in formal coats, papers, seals, pens, everything arranged to make decisions feel clean. Marco entered with Lucia at his side. Murmurs rose. One councilman stood. Your Highness, you return at a difficult time. Marco's voice was steady. I return because you called me. Another councilman's gaze moved to Lucia. And this is... Lucia's stomach tightened, but she held her posture. Lucia Conti, his lawful wife. The first councilman blinked. Lawful. Marco said, married by Father Renzo of our coastal parish. Proper witnesses, proper rights. Elisabetta spoke from her seat near Vittorio. A parish ceremony can be improvised. Lucia's hands curled. Are you accusing a priest of inventing sacraments? Elisabetta's expression remained cool. I am stating that high matters require high verification. Marco said, verify all you wish. A councilman cleared his throat. Your Highness, the immediate matter is succession. Your brother's passing has left... Marco's face tightened at the word passing. Lucia felt the grief behind his restraint. The councilman continued, a seat must be filled. The people expect stability, Vittorio said smoothly. Stability requires a household that reflects our values. Lucia's stomach clenched. There it was, the blade made of silk. Marco looked directly at Vittorio. My household reflects my values. Elisabetta's gaze sharpened. And are your values to bind our principality to a woman of questionable standing? Lucia's breath caught. The room felt suddenly too warm. Marco's voice went icy. Do not. Elisabetta lifted her chin. Truth is not insult. It is concern. Lucia spoke, her voice steady though her heart hammered. My standing became questionable because your brother promised me marriage and then abandoned me to rumor. Vittorio's smile returned faintly. Lucia, you misunderstand many things. Lucia turned to the council. I misunderstand nothing. I lived it. A councilman frowned. This is improper. Lucia cut in, controlled. Improper is a nobleman leaving a woman with nothing but disgrace and calling her unreasonable when she asks for truth. The councilman's mouth tightened. We are not here to judge private matters, Marco said. You are, if you intend to use them to judge my wife. Silence fell. Then an older councilman, grey-haired and weary-eyed, spoke carefully. If allegations are made in this chamber, we require evidence. Lucia's stomach dropped. Evidence. Her shame had been made of whispers. Whispers rarely left paper. Marco looked at Lucia. Father Renzo kept your letters. Lucia blinked. He... Marco nodded once. I asked him to. Lucia's throat tightened. You asked him to keep my past. Marco's voice was quiet. I asked him to keep proof. Because I knew men like Alessi do not stop once they begin. Lucia's chest tightened with a mix of gratitude and hurt. He had planned for this while refusing to tell her why. Rinaldi stepped forward and placed a packet on the table. The priest sent these with us. Vittorio's smile tightened. What is this? Rinaldi's voice was calm. Letters. Elisabetta's gaze hardened. From whom? Rinaldi replied, From Count Vittorio Alessi. A stir went through the room. Vittorio's eyes narrowed. This is absurd. Rinaldi opened the packet and slid out several folded pages. They bear your seal, your hand, your signature. Lucia's breath caught. She recognized the curl of the letters, the phrases she had once reread until they blurred. Vittorio leaned back slightly, still composed. A man writes many things. Lucia's voice trembled, but she kept it clear. You wrote that you would marry me. Elisabetta's lips tightened. Promises are not contracts. Marco's voice cut through. No, but they expose character. The older councilman read a page, his brow furrowing. Another councilman asked for it. The paper moved hand to hand, and with each movement Lucia felt something long locked inside her begin to loosen. One councilman looked up at Vittorio. Count, you wrote of arranging a license, of speaking to your sister, of setting a date. Vittorio's smile thinned. Young men write foolishly. Lucia's eyes flashed. You were not young. You were calculating. Elisabetta said sharply, Lucia, mind your tone. Lucia turned to her. Mind yours. You called me questionable when it was your brother who behaved without honor. A councilman cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Enough. Marco said, No, not enough. My wife will not be treated as a stain to be removed. You will address what is true. Vittorio's gaze narrowed at Marco. Your Highness, you risk your future for sentiment. Marco's expression did not change. I risk my future for justice. The older councilman lifted a hand. We will not continue in chaos. We will establish facts. First, the marriage appears lawful. Second, the letters demonstrate that the Count behaved irresponsibly. Third, the reputation of Signora Conti has been damaged by... He glanced at Vittorio, then continued carefully. By abandonment and rumor, not by legal wrongdoing. Lucia's throat tightened so painfully she could barely breathe. Elisabetta's voice was controlled, but her eyes were sharp. Even if she did no legal wrong, her presence will offend. Lucia turned to her, voice steady. I have offended people simply by refusing to disappear. I have learned to live with their discomfort. A few councilmen shifted, surprised. Marco looked at the council. My wife is not negotiable. The room went quiet. The older councilman sighed. Then we must proceed accordingly. He turned to Marco. Your Highness, the council recognizes your claim. There will be formal acknowledgement. There will be a public assembly, and there will be questions. Marco's voice stayed firm. Let them ask. The older councilman's gaze moved to Lucia. Signora Conti, if you stand beside him, you must understand the scrutiny will be heavy. Lucia's hands trembled. She thought of the market square, of the baker's wife's smile, of the Count's silky threat, of hunger. She lifted her chin. I have been scrutinized by people with less authority and more cruelty. I survived. I will survive this too. Marco's gaze flicked to her, and something in it warmed, brief and quiet. Rinaldi said, Then we are agreed. The union stands. The succession proceeds. Elisabetta's mouth tightened, but she did not speak again. Vittorio's eyes remained on Lucia, calculating, but the room had shifted. Paper had replaced whisper. Proof had replaced insinuation. When the meeting ended, Lucia felt as if she had walked through a storm without shelter. Her limbs were trembling with delayed shock. In the corridor, Vittorio stepped close enough that his voice could be low. You have always been stubborn, he murmured. Lucia met his gaze. You have always been careless with other people's lives. His smile was thin. Careless? I offered you a quiet arrangement once. Lucia's eyes flashed. You offered me silence in exchange for survival. Vittorio's gaze slid toward Marco. And now you have a prince's protection. How convenient. Marco turned slightly, and Vittorio's smile softened, too smooth to be sincere. Your Highness, Vittorio said, surely you understand the danger of binding yourself to scandal. Marco's voice was quiet. The scandal is your behavior, not my wife. Vittorio's eyes hardened a fraction. Be mindful. Courts are patient. They do not forgive embarrassment quickly. Lucia stepped forward. Then you should not embarrass yourself further. Elisabetta approached, her expression cold. Come, Vittorio. As they walked away, Lucia's hands shook so badly she had to clasp them together. Marco guided her down the corridor toward their rooms. He did not pull her, did not hurry her, only stayed close as if his presence could keep the walls from closing in. Inside, Lucia exhaled, shaky. "You had the letters?" Marco nodded once. "Yes." Lucia's eyes stung. "You planned for this." Marco's voice was careful. "I prepared for the worst." Lucia swallowed. "And still, you did not tell me." Marco's jaw tightened. "Because I hoped we could live without ever needing to use them." Lucia's voice cracked. "You cannot build a life on hope." Marco's gaze softened. "No." Lucia rubbed her palms together, trying to stop the trembling. "Your brother is dead." Marco's face tightened, and for the first time Lucia heard grief in his voice. "Yes," Lucia whispered. "I am sorry." Marco looked at her, as if the words were unexpected. Then he nodded once. Small. "Thank you." Lucia's throat tightened. "Did you love him?" Marco's gaze drifted toward the window, where the sea could be seen in a narrow strip. "He was my brother. He was kind when the court was not. He wanted to rule well." Lucia swallowed. "And now you must." Marco's mouth tightened. "Now they will try to make me." Lucia stepped closer, and without thinking, she placed her hand on his sleeve. Not to claim him, to steady him. Marco looked down at her hand, then at her face. His voice was low. "You should not have to do this." Lucia answered quietly. "Neither should you. Yet here we are." Marco's throat worked. "Tomorrow there will be a public assembly." Lucia felt her stomach clench, but she did not look away. "Yes," Marco said. "They will stare at you." Lucia gave a short, steady breath. "Let them." Marco's eyes held hers. "They will try to provoke you." Lucia replied. "Then I will answer with dignity." Marco's voice softened. "And if you wish to step back," Lucia cut in, firm, "do not offer it again as if it is mercy. I am here because I chose to be." Marco's face tightened with emotion. He struggled to keep controlled. "You chose it knowing what it costs." Lucia's eyes burned. "I chose it knowing what it costs to be thrown away. I will not be thrown away again." Silence settled between them. Not awkward now, weighted with truth. Marco reached out slowly, as if asking permission again, and this time he took both of Lucia's hands in his. His thumbs brushed her knuckles, a small gesture, careful, restrained, yet intimate in a way Lucia felt down to her bones. He said quietly, "Then we stand together." Lucia swallowed. "Together." Marco's gaze did not waver. "Yes." Lucia's breath steadied at last. She nodded once. "Then we stand." Marco lifted her hands slightly, not as a flourish, but as a vow made clear without ceremony. Outside, the palace continued with its murmurs, its footfalls, its careful rearranging of power. But inside the room, Lucia felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not safety, not certainty. A calm resolve, chosen on purpose. And when Marco released her hands, he did not step away from her as if she were a secret. He stayed close, as if she belonged beside him, and as if he meant for the world to learn it. The next morning, the palace did not wake quietly. Lucia heard footsteps in the corridor before she heard any bell, people speaking in low voices, a servant murmuring, "The assembly is set." Another answering, "He will appear." He. Not Marco. Not her husband. She rose before anyone came to dress her. She refused to be handled like a doll. When a maid entered with a careful smile, Lucia said, "I will manage my own hair." The maid blinked. "Signora," Lucia met her gaze, "you may help if you wish, but I will not be fussed over as if I am fragile. Bring pins, and a plain ribbon." The maid hurried to obey. Lucia braided her hair with steady hands. She chose the simplest gown offered, not out of humility, but out of defiance. She would not pretend she had always belonged to this world. She would belong to it now by truth, not disguise. When Marco entered, he wore formal clothing that sat on him as if it had never fully left his body. Yet his eyes were the same eyes that had watched her mend nets. He stopped in the doorway and looked at her for a long moment. Lucia lifted her chin. "Do I look like an embarrassment?" Marco crossed the room in 2 strides. "You look like yourself." Lucia's throat tightened. They will stare. Marco's voice was low. Let them learn. Lucia forced a breath. Do you feel ready? Marco's jaw worked. No. Lucia nodded. Good. Then we are equal. A brief softness touched his face. You make it easier. Lucia gave a short, humorless laugh. I did not come to make anything easy. Marco's gaze held hers. You came because you chose. Lucia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her ring. The plain band was warm from her skin. She turned it once, the way she did when she needed courage. Marco noticed. His hand came up, not taking her hand yet, only hovering. If you want me to speak first, I will. Lucia looked up. No, I will not hide behind your voice. Marco's eyes sharpened with pride. Then we go. In the corridor, Captain Rinaldi waited. He inclined his head. Your Highness, Signora. Lucia did not correct him. She simply said, Captain, if anyone tries to separate us at the doors, Rinaldi replied calmly, They will not. The council has already sent word. You enter together. Lucia studied him. Why do you help us? Rinaldi's expression remained composed. Because the state does not benefit from cruelty disguised as propriety. Lucia's mouth tightened. I have heard that line before, usually from people who intend cruelty. Rinaldi met her gaze without flinching. Then judge me by what I do next, not by what I say. Lucia nodded once. I will. They walked down a wide hall toward the assembly chamber. The farther they went, the more faces appeared. Servants paused. Courtiers turned. Some bowed, some stared. Lucia heard a whisper, quick and cutting. The fisherman's wife. Another voice answered, She speaks like she believes she can remain. Lucia did not turn her head. She kept her steps even. Marco's hand brushed her fingers, a silent question. Lucia slid her hand into his deliberately in full view of everyone. Someone sucked in a breath. Lucia felt it like a gust of wind. Marco squeezed her hand once, steady and grateful. At the doors, a herald announced Marco's presence. The words sounded ceremonial, distant, like an old song sung by strangers. Lucia heard more murmurs as they entered. The chamber was not enormous, but it was packed. Councilmen sat at one side. Nobles stood in clusters. Advisers, clerks, men with careful eyes and women with sharper ones. At the center stood a raised platform where Marco would be addressed. Lucia felt every gaze land on her, weigh her, measure her ring, her posture, her breath. Donna Elisabetta stood near the front with Count Vittorio. Elisabetta's face was calm, but her eyes were bright with calculation. Vittorio's expression carried that familiar, smooth confidence, as if the room belonged to him by nature. Marco's shoulders tightened as he took his place. Lucia stood half a step behind him at first, then corrected herself and stepped beside him. The tiny movement changed everything. It announced her refusal without a word. A councilman stood, the older one with weary eyes. He lifted a hand and the chamber quieted. People of Monterossa, he began. We gather to acknowledge what is lawful and what is necessary. Lucia heard the word lawful and felt her throat tighten. The councilman continued. With the passing of our prince, may God rest his soul, the succession passes to his brother. Murmurs rose again. Then a pause. The councilman's eyes moved to Lucia. And, he added, we must also acknowledge the prince's household. Elisabetta's lips tightened. Vittorio's eyes slid to Lucia, then to Marco. The councilman said, Prince Marco di Monterossa stands before you. A low wave of bows moved across the room. Lucia did not bow, not because she was disrespectful, because she was not here to worship, she was here to stand. Then the councilman said, he also presents his wife, Lucia Conti, married by proper rights. The words hit the room like a dropped plate. Elisabetta spoke sharply. Married in a village parish without the knowledge of the council. Lucia's fingers tightened around Marco's hand. The councilman held up a hand. The council has examined the marriage documents. The priest's testimony has been received. The union is lawful. Elisabetta's voice remained cool. Lawful does not mean suitable. Lucia felt the chamber's attention sharpen. Marco turned his head slightly, and his voice carried, quiet and precise. Do you intend to speak of suitability as if my wife is livestock? A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Elisabetta's chin lifted. Your Highness, do not twist my meaning. We speak of stability. Lucia heard the same word again. Stability, the excuse used to crush anyone who did not fit. The councilman said, We will proceed in order. He lifted a sealed packet. Before this assembly, the council will also address matters of conduct that have harmed our principality's honor. Vittorio's smile thinned. The councilman continued, Recent evidence has demonstrated that certain rumors spread beyond our walls were not mere accidents of gossip, but the result of influence and manipulation. Lucia's heart began to pound. She did not know if she wanted this moment or feared it. Elisabetta stiffened. What are you implying? The councilman said steadily, We imply nothing. We state what we have verified. He held up a letter. Count Vittorio Alessi. Vittorio's face remained composed. Yes? The councilman read aloud, not the most intimate lines but enough to show intent. Promises, arrangements, plans, a date that had been postponed with excuses. Then a line about silence being the wisest course. Lucia's hands trembled. Hearing the words in that chamber made her stomach twist. They had once been private hope. Now they were public proof. A murmur moved through the room. Vittorio said smoothly, A foolish letter written years ago is not a crime. The councilman lifted another paper. And this? He read again. A mention of speaking to Donna Elisabetta. A mention of making sure the village understood what to think. A mention of avoiding embarrassment. Elisabetta's eyes narrowed. This is offensive. Lucia stepped forward before she could stop herself. Her voice was steady, though her heart hammered. It is offensive, she said, that my life became a lesson told by mouths that never asked what was true. The chamber quieted further. Some faces turned toward her with surprise, as if she had broken a rule by speaking. Lucia kept going. I was abandoned, and the town treated me as if I had committed a crime. Doors closed, work was denied, hunger was used as punishment, all because a man's promises were convenient until they were not. Elisabetta said, You are emotional. Lucia turned her head and looked directly at her. I am clear. A few people shifted, unsettled by Lucia's refusal to shrink. Lucia lifted her chin. If you wish to speak of stability, begin by admitting that stability built on cruelty is not stability. It is fear. A councilman frowned, uncomfortable. Another looked down, as if ashamed. Vittorio's tone sharpened slightly. Lucia, you dramatize your misfortune. Lucia met his gaze. You threatened me in a market square and called it wisdom. You offered me silence in exchange for survival. That is not wisdom, that is control. Vittorio's smile returned, faint. And now you speak boldly because you stand behind a prince. Lucia's chest tightened, but she did not retreat. She said, I spoke boldly when I stood alone. That is why I survived long enough to become his wife. The words hung in the room, undeniable. Marco's hand tightened around hers. She felt his support like a living thing. The older councilman said, Count Alessi, your correspondence and testimony from Father Renzo demonstrate a deliberate harm to a citizen standing for the sake of convenience. That behavior is incompatible with the council's trust. Elisabetta snapped, The council cannot punish a count for private correspondence. The councilman replied, We do not punish. We remove influence. Effective immediately, Count Alessi will no longer serve as advisor in matters of succession or public policy. A collective inhale moved through the room. Vittorio's smile did not vanish, but it grew brittle. You remove me because you fear my voice. The councilman said, We remove you because your voice has been used to twist truth. Elisabetta's fingers curled. This is humiliation. Lucia heard the word humiliation and felt a fierce, cold clarity. Humiliation was what they called consequences, when consequences finally touched them. Vittorio bowed slightly, as if accepting a decision without accepting its justice. His eyes flicked to Lucia, and in them she saw anger kept behind glass. Then he stepped back, and Elisabetta followed him with a posture that promised she would not forget. Lucia did not feel triumph. She felt release. A door that had been locked for too long finally cracking open. The councilman turned back to Marco. Your Highness, the council affirms your claim. Today, before this assembly, you will speak your oath. Marco's jaw tightened. Lucia whispered, barely moving her lips. Breathe. Marco glanced at her. In his eyes, she saw gratitude and fear intertwined. He stepped forward to the platform. The councilman recited the words, formal and heavy. Marco repeated them, voice steady. He promised duty, protection, fairness, stewardship. Lucia listened, and with each vow she heard something else beneath it. A man forcing himself to accept a life he had tried to escape, not out of ambition, but out of conscience. When the oath was done, the councilman said, "And now the matter of the prince's household." Elisabetta's gaze sharpened again, even from her distant place. A younger councilman stood. "It is tradition that the prince's consort be presented and received." Lucia's stomach tightened. Received. As if she were a gift delivered. Marco turned abruptly, and his voice carried through the chamber. "My wife is not a tradition," he said. "She is my choice." The room went still. Lucia felt heat rush behind her eyes. She blinked hard. She refused to cry here. Marco stepped down from the platform and stood in front of Lucia, facing the assembly as if shielding her without hiding her. He spoke clearly, not loudly. This woman stood in a market square and demanded truth from a man who refused to give it. She was punished for being abandoned, not for wrongdoing. She worked for her bread. She endured contempt with her head high. She became my wife when she had nothing to gain except survival. Vittorio's jaw tightened. Marco continued. And then she gained something else. My respect. A hush fell deeper than silence. It was attention. Marco reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. Lucia's breath caught. She knew what it was. The signet ring. He held it up, not as a boast, but as a fact. "This," Marco said, "is the mark I was born into." He lowered it and took Lucia's hand, lifting her plain band into view. "And this," he said, "is the mark I chose." Lucia's heart thudded so hard it hurt. Marco looked at the council. "If you wish to judge whether I am fit to lead, judge me by what I protect. I protect my people, and I protect my wife." Elisabetta's voice cut in sharp. "A prince who allows his heart to steer him is dangerous." Lucia turned her head toward Elisabetta, and her voice came out calm, like a blade she did not wave. "A prince who has no heart is worse," Lucia said. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not approval exactly, something like reluctant respect. The older councilman lifted his hand again. "Tradition requires acknowledgement, not submission." He looked at Lucia, and his voice softened a fraction. "Signora Conti, do you accept the duties that come with standing beside him?" Lucia felt every eye on her again. She thought of her father's empty chair. She thought of the cottage by the sea. She thought of hunger and doors and smiles that closed like traps. She lifted her chin. "I accept duties," Lucia said, "but not humiliation." The councilman blinked. "Explain." Lucia answered, "I will not be treated as a stain to be tolerated. I will not be spoken of as if I am less human because I was abandoned. I will be judged by my actions. I have worked. I have kept my vows. I have built a home with my husband. If anyone here cannot accept that, they may keep their distance, but they will not control my life." A long pause followed. Then a woman in the crowd, older, richly dressed, spoke softly. "She speaks with courage." Another voice, a man's, muttered, "Or stubbornness." The woman replied, "Often the two are the same." Lucia felt Marco's fingers tighten around hers. He was steady, but she could feel tension in him like a taut rope. The older councilman nodded once. "Then let it be recorded that the prince's marriage stands, and his wife is received as lawful consort, with all respect due." The words hit Lucia like a wave. Respect due, not respect begged for, not respect earned through suffering. Respect due because she was a person, and the law had finally agreed to admit it. The crowd moved, bows and murmurs and careful looks. Some faces remained cold, others softened into acceptance. A few looked ashamed. Lucia did not care which was which. She cared only that Marco had spoken publicly and plainly, and had not flinched. When the assembly broke, servants and courtiers swarmed with polite phrases. "Your Highness," "Signora," "Congratulations," "May the principality prosper." Lucia heard it like distant rain. A young lady approached, eyes bright with curiosity. Signora Conti, I have never heard anyone speak to Donna Elisabetta that way, Lucia replied. Then perhaps she has never been spoken to honestly. The girl's mouth fell open. Then she laughed softly, delighted, and hurried away. Rinaldi appeared beside Marco. Your Highness, the council requests a brief private discussion. Marco nodded once. Then he turned to Lucia. Wait for me? Lucia lifted her chin. I will not be moved like furniture. I will wait where I choose. Marco's mouth twitched. Then choose somewhere with air. Lucia surprised herself by smiling. I will. He squeezed her hand, then followed Rinaldi. Lucia walked out of the chamber and down a corridor until the noise of voices faded. She found a small balcony overlooking the sea. The sight of it steadied her more than the palace ever could. She gripped the stone railing and let herself breathe. A voice behind her said, You will be the talk of every drawing room. Lucia turned. Nonna Caterina stood there, out of place, and yet entirely herself, headscarf tied, eyes sharp. Lucia blinked, stunned. How are you here? Lucia asked. Nonna Caterina snorted. Do you think fishermen have no legs? I came with Father Renzo. Lucia's throat tightened. He came? Nonna Caterina jerked her head toward the corridor. He is being thanked by men who did not come to your father's funeral. He looks ready to strike them with a sermon. Lucia let out a short laugh that shook. I missed him. Nonna Caterina stepped closer and looked Lucia up and down. You stand straight. Lucia swallowed. I tried. Nonna Caterina grunted. You did more than try. You made them swallow their own words. Lucia's eyes stung. Not all of them. Nonna Caterina waved a hand. You cannot make everyone decent. Only yourself. Lucia nodded, breath shaky. Do the village people know? Nonna Caterina's mouth tightened. They know enough. Some will brag they always suspected. Some will claim they were fooled. Most will do what villages do. They will shift their stories to match the sun. Lucia exhaled. I do not know if I can go back there now. Nonna Caterina shrugged. You may not need to, but listen to me, girl. Do not let this palace make you forget the sea. It taught you how to breathe. Lucia whispered. I will not forget. Nonna Caterina's eyes narrowed. Good. Now where is he? Asking for more duties, Lucia said, and the bitterness surprised her. Nonna Caterina snorted. Men love duties. It makes them feel important. Love makes them feel frightened. Lucia's cheeks warmed. He does not. Nonna Caterina cut in. He does. I saw his eyes when you spoke. A man who does not love looks bored. He looked terrified. Lucia swallowed hard. Terrified of what? Nonna Caterina's gaze softened, just slightly. Of losing what he finally chose. Before Lucia could answer, footsteps approached. Marco appeared, and behind him, Father Renzo, face solemn and proud. Marco's gaze went straight to Lucia, as if the corridor had been empty of everyone else. Father Renzo bowed his head slightly to Lucia. My child. Lucia crossed the small space and took his hands. Father. Thank you. Father Renzo's eyes were warm. I did what a priest should do. I kept truth when others preferred rumors. Lucia's throat tightened. You saved me. Father Renzo shook his head. You saved yourself by refusing to become invisible. Marco stood close, listening without interrupting. Lucia glanced at him. Did they question you? She asked. Marco's voice was low. They questioned everything. Lucia's jaw tightened. And? Marco's eyes held hers. And they found nothing that can undo you. You. Not us. Lucia felt her chest tighten. Father Renzo cleared his throat. There is one matter. Lucia's stomach dropped. What now? Father Renzo looked between them. The council has recognized your marriage, but the people will only believe what they see repeated. Lucia stared. Repeated. Marco's jaw tightened. They want a public ceremony. Father Renzo nodded. Not a new marriage, a reaffirmation, a blessing in the palace chapel. It will settle mouths. Lucia's first instinct was fury. Settle mouths, as if her life existed to quiet other people. Then she looked at Marco's face and saw he was not pleased either. In his eyes was the same frustration she felt, and beneath it, a quiet question. Will you do this with me? Lucia drew a slow breath. "Fine," she said. "Not for them. For us." Marco's gaze softened. "For us." Nonna Caterina muttered, "Make sure they give you good bread afterward." Lucia almost laughed again, and this time the laugh had warmth. The palace chapel was small, plain for a palace, built of stone and simplicity. Lucia liked it immediately. It felt closer to the village church than to court display. As Lucia walked in, she saw faces from the assembly. Some watched with polite interest, some with cool judgment, some with genuine relief that things would be neat again. Elisabetta stood near the side, face composed, eyes sharp. Vittorio was not beside her. Lucia noticed, and the absence felt like a door closing on its own. Marco stood at the front with Father Renzo. Lucia approached alone, as if walking toward the life she had chosen, without being pulled into it. Marco turned as she reached him. His eyes searched her face. Lucia whispered, "Do not look at me as if I might vanish." Marco's voice was low. "I spent years watching things vanish." Lucia swallowed. "I am here." Marco nodded once, as if anchoring himself to that truth. Father Renzo began with simple words, no grand speech, no long sermon, just the weight of vows spoken again in a place that demanded witnesses. "Do you reaffirm," Father Renzo asked Marco, "that Lucia is your lawful wife, to be honored and protected?" Marco answered clearly, "I do, before God and before anyone who dares to doubt it." A few people shifted at the sharpness, but no one interrupted. Father Renzo turned to Lucia. "And do you reaffirm that Marco is your lawful husband, to be honored and supported?" Lucia lifted her chin. "I do, and I will not be shamed for it." Father Renzo's mouth twitched almost a smile. "Good." He joined their hands. Lucia felt the warmth of Marco's palm, felt how steady it was, felt how different this touch was from any promise she had ever been given. This touch did not ask her to trust words. It offered her a life. Father Renzo said, "Then receive the blessing of a marriage already made, already true, already tested." He spoke the blessing, and Lucia listened with her eyes fixed on Marco's face. When Father Renzo finished, he stepped back. The moment hung, quiet and full. Marco did not release Lucia's hand. Instead, he turned toward the people gathered and spoke without being asked. "I lived as a fisherman because I wanted a life that belonged to me," he said. "I do not regret that life. It taught me what my title never did." A murmur moved through the chapel. Marco continued, "This woman became my wife when she had nothing to offer but courage. I will not allow any person in this principality to treat courage as disgrace." Elisabetta's eyes narrowed, but she did not speak. Marco turned back to Lucia. His voice softened. "Lucia." Her throat tightened. "Yes." He lifted her hand and brought it to his lips. The gesture was simple, restrained, and yet it made Lucia's breath catch harder than any grand display could have. Marco whispered so only she could hear, "I should have told you sooner." Lucia's eyes burned. "Yes." Marco's jaw tightened, emotion breaking through discipline. "I was afraid." Lucia swallowed. "Of what?" Marco's gaze held hers. "Of bringing you into a world that would try to break you." Lucia's voice came out rough. "It tried before. It failed." Marco's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "It did." Lucia whispered. "And you could have chosen someone born to this." Marco's eyes sharpened with certainty. "I chose someone brave enough to change it." Lucia blinked fast. She refused to cry. Then a tear escaped anyway, hot and stubborn. Marco's thumb brushed it away, quick, as if he would not allow even her tears to become a spectacle. He whispered, "Do not give them your pain." Lucia answered, "This is not pain." Marco searched her face. "Then what is it?" Lucia breathed in. "Relief." Marco's throat worked. "And..." Lucia gave a shaky exhale. "And love." The word landed between them like a vow made without witnesses. Marco's gaze softened, and for a moment the entire chapel disappeared for Lucia. There was only his face and the truth in it. He said quietly, "Lucia, I love you." Lucia's breath caught as if she had been waiting for that sentence her entire life, even when she told herself she did not need it. She whispered, "Say it again." Marco's mouth tightened with tenderness. I love you. Lucia nodded once, tears still threatening. Good. Marco almost smiled. Good? Lucia's voice trembled. Because I have had enough of men who speak beautifully and mean nothing. Your words are few, but when you speak, the world moves. Marco's eyes held hers. Then let it move. After the chapel, the palace tried to wrap them again in ceremony. Servants offered refreshments. Courtiers offered congratulations that sounded rehearsed. A clerk approached with papers. Marco waved the papers away for the moment. Later. The clerk hesitated. Your Highness, the council... Marco's voice was calm but absolute. Later. Lucia felt a startled satisfaction at the firm boundary. They stepped out into a quieter corridor, and Lucia finally let her shoulders drop. Rinaldi appeared, expression composed. Your Highness, Signora, the council has one more announcement. Lucia's stomach tightened. What now? Rinaldi looked at Lucia directly. Count Alessi has been instructed to leave the palace and return to his estates. His advisory privileges are suspended indefinitely. Lucia exhaled, the breath shaking. Indefinitely. Rinaldi nodded. Donna Elisabetta remains, but her influence has been reduced. She will not lead the household decisions. That authority will rest with the council until you, Signora, establish your own. Lucia blinked. My own? Rinaldi's gaze remained steady. If you intend to stand beside him, the household will reflect your values as well. The council has agreed to it. Lucia felt suddenly dizzy. Values. Not merely survival now, but direction. She looked at Marco. Did you do that? Marco's jaw tightened. I insisted. Lucia's throat tightened. Why? Marco's gaze held hers. Because if they force you into a corner, they will try to make you grateful for crumbs again. Lucia swallowed. I am not. Marco's voice softened. No, you are not. Rinaldi inclined his head. There is also a message from the coastal parish. Several families have sent apologies. Lucia's mouth tightened. Apologies now that I have a title at my back. Rinaldi did not argue. He only said, some apologize for advantage, some because they are ashamed. You will decide which is which. Lucia nodded once. I will. Rinaldi stepped back. If you wish, there is a small terrace overlooking the sea. It is quiet. Marco's gaze shifted to Lucia. Do you want quiet? Lucia exhaled. Yes. They walked without attendants, just the two of them, until they reached the terrace. The sea stretched out beyond the stone, and Lucia felt her lungs fill properly for the first time since the assembly. Marco stood beside her, hands resting on the railing, posture controlled. Yet his shoulders looked less burdened now, as if speaking his choice aloud had loosened something. Lucia said quietly, Do you miss the cottage? Marco glanced at her. Yes. Lucia's mouth tightened. So do I. Marco's gaze softened. We can visit. Lucia turned to him. Visit is not the same as belong. Marco's eyes held hers. Then we will make this place belong to us the way the sea did. By living in it honestly. Lucia swallowed. Can you? Marco's jaw tightened. I will try. Lucia gave a short nod. I will not let them use you like a seal on their documents. Marco's mouth twitched. You sound like you're about to take command. Lucia's eyes flashed. Perhaps I am. Marco's gaze warmed. Then the palace will tremble. Lucia let out a small laugh, and this time it was real. Do not tease me. Marco stepped closer, his voice lowered. It is not teasing. Lucia's breath caught as he reached up and touched her cheek, careful, as if he still feared the world might accuse him of too much tenderness. Lucia leaned into his hand before she could stop herself. Marco's thumb brushed her cheekbone. When I first offered you marriage, he said, I thought I was offering you a rope. Lucia whispered, You were. Marco's eyes held hers. I did not expect you to become the anchor. Lucia swallowed hard. I did not expect you to become home. A silence fell, thick with everything they had not said in the cottage, because fear had been too close. Marco's voice was low. Say what you want from me now. Lucia's hands trembled slightly as she lifted them and placed them against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath the formal cloth. I want you to stop apologizing with silence, she said, and start choosing me with words when the world is listening. Marco's jaw tightened. I will. Lucia's eyes burned. And I want you to remember the fisherman. Marco's gaze sharpened. I am the fisherman. Lucia shook her head. You are both. Do not let the prince devour the man who offered a coin and called me his wife before I even knew how to believe it. Marco's throat worked. I won't. Lucia whispered. Promise. Marco lifted her hand and pressed it against his lips again, slower this time. I promise. Lucia's breath shook. And I want... Marco's eyes searched hers. What? Lucia forced herself to say it clearly. I want a life where no woman is punished for being abandoned. Marco's gaze steadied, and something fierce and tender settled in it. Then we will build it. Lucia blinked. We? Marco nodded once. We, you and I. Lucia's eyes filled again. She gave a shaky laugh. You are speaking like a ruler. Marco's mouth tightened with emotion. I am speaking like your husband. Lucia swallowed. Then speak one more thing. Marco leaned closer. Tell me. Lucia's voice was soft but unyielding. Tell me, in the simplest words you know, that you will never be ashamed of me. Marco did not hesitate. Never, he said. Lucia's breath caught. Even when they bring up my past. Never, Marco repeated. Lucia whispered. Even when they call me unsuitable. Marco's eyes flashed with controlled anger. They will learn to be quiet. Lucia's throat tightened. Even when you wear the signet. Marco lifted his hand, still holding the ring wrapped in cloth. He opened it. The crest caught the light briefly. He looked at it, then at Lucia. I will wear it, he said, because duty requires it. Lucia's stomach tightened. Marco continued. But I will wear this first. He took Lucia's plain band gently between his fingers and lifted it as if it were the most precious thing he owned. Then, with deliberate care, he put the signet ring on his hand and placed his hand over Lucia's, plain ring and all. Before the council, he said, before the court, before anyone who wishes to measure you, I will remember what saved me from becoming what they wanted. Lucia whispered, What saved you? Marco's gaze held hers. You. Lucia's breath broke. She reached up and rested her forehead briefly against his, the way she might have in the cottage if the world had not been pressing at the door. Marco's hand slid to the back of her head, gentle, protective without possession. He murmured, Lucia, she answered. Yes. His voice was hushed, urgent, tender. Thank you for not turning away. Lucia swallowed. I almost did. Marco's hand tightened slightly. But you didn't. Lucia's voice trembled. Because you looked at me in the doorway and did not ask me to disappear. Marco's breath warmed her cheek. I never will. Lucia lifted her head and met his eyes. Then we begin. Marco's gaze steadied. Yes. Lucia's lips parted, and she surprised herself by speaking as if addressing not only him, but the life behind them. I was humiliated, she said softly. I was starved. I was dismissed as if my heart made me guilty. Marco's jaw tightened, pain flickering in his eyes. Lucia continued. And then I rebuilt myself with salt on my hands and rope under my nails. I will not let anyone take that rebirth away just because my husband has a title. Marco's voice was low. They won't. Lucia's eyes shone. Because we won't let them. Marco's mouth tightened with fierce tenderness. Because we won't. They stood together on the terrace as the sea moved below, indifferent to rank, indifferent to rumors, faithful only to its own rhythm. Lucia felt at last the true shape of her ending. Not a rescue, a union chosen, defended and spoken aloud. And when Marco drew her hand to his chest again, as if to keep her close to the steady beat there, Lucia understood the simplest truth she had learned, through every closed door and every cruel smile. A world may try to define a woman by what was done to her, but love and dignity are built by what she chooses to become. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.